And good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome back to Planning and Housing Committee. This is our 40th meeting. Yep. I'd like to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la présence ont enrichi et continue d'enrichir ces terres. Coordinator, may I get a roll call, please?
Councillor Brockington?
Here.
Councillor Curry? Here. Councillor Dudas?
Here.
Councillor Johnson? Here. Councillor Kavanaugh? Present. Councillor Kelly?
Present.
Councillor Kicks? Councillor Lowe?
Here. Here.
Councillor Chair.
Present.
Councillor Troster? Here. Vice Chair Gower?
Here.
Chair, your quorum.
Thank you very much, Kelly. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as item 5.1 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those specifically identified in the Planning Act who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on January the 22nd, 2025, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Are the minutes of our meeting 39, December 4th confirmed? Thank you. We'll try to keep the procedural complexity to a minimum. There are responses to inquiries on the agenda. There is the development charge funding principle for new roads allocation. Councillor Kitts has a motion to lift that. Is that carried? Thank you. And then there is the response to inquiry, the issuance of end notices at the Landlord Tenant Board in Ottawa. Councillor Troster has a motion to lift that. Is that carried? And Councillor Troster has a motion to consider items 4.1 and 6.1 together. Is that carried? Thank you. Moving on, there is a zoning bylaw amendment at 37 Wild Pine Court to consider. I don't hear that anyone wants to hold that one, but Vice Chair Gower wanted to make a quick comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to acknowledge the feedback we've received from residents and neighbors on this file. There was a petition that was submitted through the development review process. So a lot of attention on this, despite the fact that there's no delegations registered. This is a very walkable location in Stittsville, and through this process, we are going to be able to see 60% of this property conveyed to the city to be protected as a natural area, which is important. There's a large forested area and an area alongside Pool Creek. But there is a lot of concern still from the community around the proposed development. It would connect two cul-de-sacs, Ravenscroft and Wild Pine. They've been there for 30 or 40 years, and even going back to Goulburn Township days, they've been planned to connect when 37 Wild Pine is eventually developed. And here we are now, but there will be an impact through construction, and there will be an impact with traffic and likely parking. We saw that with the nearby development in the last few years. So through the site plan, I think there's a lot of work we still need to do to address concerns and make sure we're making sure that there's a construction management plan, understanding if we need to change rules around parking. I think we'll very likely need a turning signal added to the lights at Stittsville Main. So these are all things that we need to have a good look at through the site plan. So more to come on this file, even if committee may approve it today. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Are there any other comments on this item? Is that carried?
Carried.
Thank you very much. Item 5.2 is the front ending. Oh, I'm sorry, the applicant is here. If the committee is prepared to carry this, and clearly we are, do you still wish to speak? Thank you. So that item is carried. Item 5.2, the front ending report designing construction of the March Road and Buckbean Avenue intersection in Canada North. I hadn't anticipated any presentation. There were no delegations and no correspondence. Did anyone want to hold that item? Are there any applicants on this one? Does that item carry? Thank you very much. So that will bring us back to the top of the agenda. First in, first out, the development charge funding principle for new roads allocation. That's been lifted for discussion, and I'm guessing Councillor Kitts would like to speak to it.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If you'll allow me a little indulgence, I think there's some important context I'd like to share before getting to my comments on the inquiry, and I have a couple questions. The ward boundary changes that happened for 2022 changed Ward 19 more dramatically than any other ward in the city. And the reason that's relevant is because it made it so that nearly all greenfield development happening in the East End is now confined within Orleans South, which was not the case previously. So that change enabled me to get a really holistic picture of the challenges and the shortcomings of how this developing community is being planned and how it continues to grow. So I have been on a mission since that time to find out how we ended up in a place where development is rapidly outpacing infrastructure. We have experienced explosive growth without any new significant infrastructure to support it. And I know that I am a broken record on this issue and continually talking about the congestion and lack of mobility options and apparent sort of disregard for the transportation network in this area. And I'll be honest, I feel a little bit gaslit by staff on this issue because when I raise these concerns, I hear there are growing pains in growing communities. There is congestion all over the city, that reasonableness is applied to transportation impact assessments when recommending approval of all this development. And I think I said at the last planning committee meeting, I often feel like I'm the only one who's banging the drum on what I see as a serious quality of life issue that is bad and getting worse. And I want to say I'm grateful to the mayor for hearing me out on this issue and acknowledging that there's a pressing concern and a problem in South Orleans. But I feel like staff haven't in a meaningful way acknowledged that South Orleans is exceptional and that there is a problem. So the response to this inquiry reveals that I'm not crazy. We did not spend what the Transportation Master Plan says we needed to spend on arterial new road construction. And I'll come back to that because I have some questions. But also that the East End has received over $100 million less in road infrastructure investment than the West and the South, despite growing in lockstep. By my math, over the last decade, the South received 174 million from that budget line. The West received 131, and the East comes in behind even downtown at only 20 million over the last decade. And I want to focus on the growth areas because I pulled the building permits issued over the same time period from 2013 to 2022, 7,200 permits for Canada-Stittsville, 7,100 permits for Orleans South, and 4,800 for South Nepean, Barrhaven, Finley Creek. So there's a funding discrepancy, but not a growth discrepancy. There's a perception that the East End gets less, and this inquiry response confirms it. The East did not get a single dollar of new roads allocations from 2018 to 2022. And I'm not really interested in litigating that issue. what's done is done. But what I'm looking for today is an acknowledgement from staff that the east is behind, and a commitment that the transportation master plan update is going to address that. In my view, there's almost no longer any reason to debate that. I have the receipts, and the people who purchased homes in this area over the last decade spent a lot of money in development charges to fund projects that have not been realized. So can I get that acknowledgement and commitment from staff?
Mr. Chair, yes, staff does acknowledge that there's tremendous growth out to the east, and that the infrastructure that will be reflected in transportation master plan, which is a longer term outlook of the needs to 2046, will consider the growth rates.
Thank you very much, truly. I feel like I have turned over every stone on this, but I really just want to see my community grow in a healthy way. And in terms of the underspending, per the 2013 Transportation Master Plan, 78% of development charge collections were to fund new roads related to growth specifically. The inquiry says that we fell short of that from 2015 to 2024, with only 62% spent on roads. Could I get an explanation about that discrepancy, how the shift happened?
Mr. Chair, the current TNP, not the one that we're updating, had a list of projects based on a forecast of growth at the time in different areas. And there were projects that were identified in priority, and that's how we proceeded with implementation of that plan, of the priorities that council approved. Also for the east, we're talking about roads here, but just want to point out also that there was tremendous funding put into our rapid transit system, particularly the light rail program. We saw extensions from stage 1 out to the east as well. And we also have some projects now where stage 2 is working on the extension to the west and the south, with the south opening, line opening earlier this year. So it was the funding for the roads programs were based on a set of priorities that were established previously. The TNP update, which we will bring to committee later this summer, this would be the part 2 with the capital program. So council will have an opportunity to look at that list of priorities based on the criteria that committee and council approved phase 1 for the evaluation, how to prioritize these projects.
Okay, I guess what I'm looking to figure out is, because I presume that percentage, the 78%, was based on the projects and the projected growth at that time, and all of these master plans sort of work together and speak to each other. So we approve growth based on the transportation infrastructure that's going to be there. We've spent less on that, meaning less projects have been able to be completed, and yet there's no sort of parallel impact to the growth. The growth continues to happen. So I guess for transportation, the update that's forthcoming, do we anticipate that there will be less of a percentage allocated to arterial roads? And if not, does that sort of correlate to how we are growing?
The TNP will identify the project needs and how they're implemented, or the pace of their being constructed would be very dependent on funding, on how much DC we've collected. And these growth projects also have a benefit to existing components. So there's a tax component to their funding as well. So, we will identify where the growth is happening, and these are the projects that you need in this order to satisfy the growing demand, and how quickly we implement the project is all dependent on funding.
Okay. So I think our system for funding infrastructure is a bit I don't think it's working. I think, for the last however many decades, the way we fund road projects is we create an account for a project. We contribute a little bit to that account every year, waiting for the full project cost to be collected before starting on it. So projects are completed decades after a need is identified, and we're constantly chasing our tails because as we wait to accumulate the full funding, the cost of the project is going up year over year with inflationary increases. So we can never sort of catch up. So I think we need to make a change on how we fund projects by looking at phasing them in, and also, if possible, forecasting the revenue that we will recoup through DC collections, that we don't have to wait until the full amount is in the bank before starting on a project. So I have a motion to look at this, which I hope you will support, and I apologize for the last minuteness of it. We are going back and forth with staff, but Kelly, if you could put it on the screen. Whereas the funding shortfall for new roads infrastructure has resulted in significant delays and unmet needs in transportation infrastructure development, particularly in areas that have and are experiencing rapid residential growth. And whereas the current process requires substantial time to secure full funding, creating barriers to address various transportation demands in a timely manner, while new residential development is ongoing. And whereas the delay causes significant escalation of overall project costs due to year-over-year inflationary increases. And whereas phasing the funding of road projects in alignment with the transportation master plan and development charge background studies could advance construction timelines and improve community connectivity within the overall transportation network. Therefore, be it resolved that staff review and develop options for phasing high priority new road projects in alignment with the TMP and DC background studies. And be it further resolved that based on average annual DC income, staff explore making available forecasted revenues to expedite construction, including provisions for reallocating funds if a project segment is delayed, maximizing efficiency and meeting growth-related infrastructure demands. And be it further resolved that staff bring the funding review report back to the appropriate standing committee that includes the feasibility and implementation options of phasing in advance of the tabling of the Transportation Master Plan Part 2.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kitts. Councillor DeRoche.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I just want to take a moment to commend Councillor Kitts and her office for undertaking this work. This was a lot of research, and it really shouldn't be this hard to see where we're spending our development charge money on not only roads, but on cycling and pedestrian infrastructure in the suburban communities. And I think we're on the way to doing that. It shouldn't be this hard, though, I think, for a councillor to see the transparency of the decisions that are made in terms of prioritization of projects and how those are progressing compared to the population growth. I'm sympathetic to the councillor's concerns. I share them in my own community. I'm looking forward to the Transportation Master Plan report. I do hope that we frame it that we have some very large suburban communities that have basically rural infrastructure. That's what we have. We have rural roads that are serving tens of thousands of people. And so it's not a surprise that we're not winning on cycling. It's not a surprise that people don't want to work to their local jobs. We don't have the infrastructure. No one's talking about building a Queensway to the south end, but we need complete streets. We need, in many cases, 4 lanes. That is the exact kind of infrastructure that we have throughout the city. So I'm looking forward to that initiative. And again, I hope we start framing that these road investments, these transportation investments, are about converting rural roads, rural transportation in urban areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so thank you to Councillor Kitts for raising this. I do wish I had seen the motion a little earlier, given the implications for funding changes. I think that's actually something my office would have liked to consider a bit more carefully. I understand it's just to explore it, so I'll support the motion, but generally speaking, like, I'm not smart enough to do all of it. So I'm going to have my questions here. So I just wanted to understand, with respect to allocating DCs against because often what we do is a combination of funds to move any particular project forward. And so are there times where we would be, advancing a project because it had all other sources of funding that could sort of initiate a project faster? Or is it really the case that we hold back on projects completely until a DC is completely built out?
The Chair, the project list, every project has different funding sources. If we're speaking about roads, typically roads growth is about 95% DCs and 5% tax. For cycling, it's I think it's about 50% DCs and 50% tax. So they vary. And then there are for transit, sometimes there are federal programs for transit and active transportation where there's funding that could be made available. So we take advantage of all sources of funding to expedite as many projects as we can. Again, these projects have their own programs, so there are priorities for active transportation, priorities for transit, priorities for roads. So we don't sit on opportunities. If funding is available, we push those projects through.
Thank you. So I get, so just to look back at the motion then, was this motion specifically looking at road related projects as its category?
Yes.
Okay, so no other project categories that collect DCs.
I mean, I guess ask staff what's possible, but my interest is, and basically the roads projects have such high price tags that's what's contributing to this delay. We're waiting years and years and years to amass the funds to be able to start them. So I think that the problem is with, you know, these arterial road constructions that we're like lagging behind. But whether that can be applied to other sorts of projects.
I would prefer it wasn't. So, you know, I just want to know that the boundaries are there around roads. So, you know, for like with respect to other investments for areas that have active transportation options, you know, one of the tricky parts for an outer urban ward is that, you know, if you look at the sidewalk layer for Geo Ottawa, many of our sidewalks are over 20 years old, while the sidewalks in newer neighborhoods are less than 5. So you know, and also the zoning for how you move around in an outer urban neighborhood. We don't have commercial. And I know your example, it often doesn't have commercial nearby as well. But, you know, we struggle with that too. But of course, our roads will never qualify for DCs because we're not actually growth. We're going to play with that a little bit more. So anyway, all this to say, I will support the review of it, but I wanted to sort of, I really would like to know if we were to make a shift into a different way of allocating DCs, that we wouldn't be hamstringing ourselves to piggyback onto other sources of funding that come from other levels of government or that come from the tax base through budget allocations, through councillor work to make certain aspects of their ward a priority. I would hate to lose some of those discretions based on this motion.
That's correct, councillor.
Thank you for those assurances. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I'll support the motions. I'm interested to see the outcomes. I appreciate the arguments my colleagues making. Certainly the feeling that infrastructure isn't keeping up with growth is not unique to the East End. In fact, I have an email from the weekend from a resident who told me, why doesn't the West get any investment? It always goes to the East, roads and transit. So everyone's feeling in the city, in the suburban areas, I'm sure. But what I really wanted to say was, I think we can phase, we can tweak, we can make all the changes we want. What we're seeing is a symptom of the broken financial model for cities, that we do not have the financial tools to invest in all the infrastructure we need to keep up with the massive growth that we're seeing. And it's a fight that the mayor is taking to the province and the feds, AMO, FCM. And until we get that structural problem fixed, we're going to keep coming back year after year, term after term to this council and wondering why DCs aren't solving our problem. They're just not adequate to meet the growth requirements that we have. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Vice Chair. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and obviously want to thank my colleague, Councillor Kitts, for her really well done presentation today. So would want to echo the comments of my colleagues on congratulating her for that work. And I think she herself said that she is a broken record on this issue and has done a good job of identifying the shortcomings in her communities. But I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with the majority of my colleagues around this table that would say that this is a citywide issue, that infrastructure needs are not keeping up with development anywhere in the city, despite higher amounts being spent in other areas. And I am a broken record when it comes to the major road of March Road, which connects my community to the rest of the city. There are very limited options for residents living west of that area, which is developing at a extremely fast pace with thousands of units. We just approved a new signalized intersection on March Road. And in that report, the ward councillor identified another intersection only 500 meters south of that where I see close calls all the time, probably on a daily basis. So this is a safety issue. This is a large quality of life issue for people. And options are limited to get around these log jams in the city. So I really appreciate the motion that Councillor Kitts has put forward, and I hope that everyone will support it because we absolutely need to find ways around this challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Brockington?
Thanks, Chair. I'm not interested in debating, but rather getting a staff opinion or comment on the actual motion. What are you doing already versus what is Councillor Kitts asking you to do as per the motion?
Chair, the motion speaks to, well, my colleagues in finance will look at the funding and the budgeting opportunities and address the resolution that's here. So with the TNP, we'll identify the projects and how quickly and how much we can build them. Really depends on the amount of money and how can that be financed. So this is what the motion speaks to. Look at those opportunities to advance funds as you forecast and look out at the potential revenue that we could collect. So finance will do this analysis and report back on that, and then we'll take whatever the result is and prepare for you a network and a priority plan based on affordability.
Yeah, and just reviewing the motion as was presented, there's nothing in it that's radical. So my question is, aren't you already doing Councillor Kitts is asking you to do per her motion?
The change is looking out at the forecast of potential revenue. There's an opportunity to advance some of that in anticipation of the forecast revenue.
Okay, I will support the motion. I think on principle, I understand and support it on principle. But Chair, as you know, and other colleagues, funding for infrastructure renewal is as important and I think is as underfunded as putting funds aside for building new committed projects. So I do support the motion that Councillor Kitts has moved to.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Kavanaugh?
Thank you very much. I think this brings up the issue that we're all fighting over scraps because there's just not much there. And development charges, as we know, are not popular with developers. And I've read that people don't think they're a great idea overall in terms of how they affect the pricing of houses. But that's all we got, and it's because we keep our taxes low, but we're paying for it in other ways. I mean, I've got projects that are forecast to have development charges in 2027, 2028. So hope I'm still breathing. It's just, it's ridiculous. And we're not focusing. We have a major deficit in infrastructure overall, not just roads. I'm wondering if this is something that should be at Transportation Committee, by the way, since it's related to TMP. So I can support looking at this. We're all in the same boat. Older areas like Bay Ward have issues where renewal is needed because this is not necessarily for roads, but for renewal of buildings because they've aged out and there's intensification going on, especially in my area with stage 2 of LRT being right at their doorstep. We're going to have population growths that are going to be at least 5 times more. But the infrastructure was designed for the 1960s bungalows in the neighborhood. So we've got all kinds of issues as we do intensification as well. So just a reminder of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Can I just confirm with the clerk or staff? This is a DC related item, and the increase been driven by requests around transportation infrastructure as it supports growth anticipated in the official plan. Can I just confirm that this is appropriately considered within the context of this program?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In consultation with legal services, it is a development charge matter which would be within scope.
Thank you very much. Councillor Curry?
Just for another perspective, no one has a crystal ball, but if you think there's a chance we might have a conservative federal government coming our way, it's important, I think, for us anyways, as members of this committee to watch the Jordan Peterson interview of Pierre Poilievre that was for about 2 hours to watch, because in it, the potential future prime minister makes some comments about development charges and specifically to municipalities. And it sounded more like get rid of them altogether or lose federal funding as opposed to reduce. So whether you think that might be our future or not, I think it would be helpful for us to contemplate what that might look like. Given Councillor Gower's comments, you know, we never have had enough money. So the funding model maybe is the problem, right? So you think about people on AMO, people on FCM. That's where these conversations need to take place. What would an alternative look like? If we don't have any development charges, imagine that world, right? But that might be our world. But I say, watch the interview for 2 hours and see the very specific directions to municipalities that he lists. Not just development charges, but development standards. And the resulting action would be, if we don't change them, that we would lose federal funding. So just to add a little overall paradigm shift in this conversation, I would recommend we all watch that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curry, and I would be remiss not to say my usual piece with respect to a future that doesn't have development charges is one in which it's going to be very, very challenging to build infrastructure given political mandates to do things on the base of taxes. If we're going to get rid of development charges, there has to be a new deal between the federal, province, and municipalities. Municipalities and city councils simply cannot tax to build infrastructure to the level necessary. So I'll be a broken record on that. I don't see any further questions. Is that motion passed? Thank you very much, colleagues. So we'll move on then to items 4.2 and 6.1. I hadn't anticipated a presentation from staff. I've much read the reports of those recommendations that staff have made. So we're going to move into delegations. It's a lengthy list of 24 delegates. I'll try to read out the ones who are coming next. My understanding is that some of the delegates will be coming up as a brigade and group together to keep us along. Oh shit! Oh shoot! Yeah. So there are motions. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much. I have 2 motions this morning. I think I'll read the one about provincial advocacy first. So, whereas amendments to the Residential Tenancies Act 2006 to protect tenants from rent evictions received royal assent on June 28, 2003 through Schedule 7 of the Helping Homebuyers Protecting Tenants Act 2023, Bill 97, but have not yet been proclaimed into force. Whereas these pending amendments include, among other protections, a requirement that landlords who wish to evict a tenant to make a renovation or repair to a rental unit provide a report by a qualified individual certifying that vacant possession of the rental unit is required and include penalties and fines for non-compliance with this requirement. And whereas funding for tenant education and tenant legal defense is required to ensure that tenants make informed decisions when faced with potential evictions to prevent unlawful evictions and to mitigate the devastating impact of unnecessary displacement of individuals and families. And whereas the Government of Ontario recognized the need for tenant protection in their Bill 97,
And whereas the delay in these provisions being proclaimed into force of Schedule 7 has required municipalities in Ontario to consider spending limited municipal resources in passing municipal bylaws simply mirroring the approved provincial legislation. Therefore, be it resolved that the council direct the city clerk on behalf of council to write to the Premier of Ontario and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to request that the province immediately proclaim into force the tenant protections in the Residential Tenancies Act 2006 that were passed in June 2023 through Bill 97 in order to prevent instances of illegal evictions. Fund additional public awareness and education resources regarding tenant rights around evictions due to renovations and repair, as well as evictions generally. And provide additional funding to add resources for provincially funded legal clinics to support and protect tenants and to prevent instances of illegal evictions. Be it further resolved that staff be directed to communicate with their counterparts in the appropriate ministries to inquire on how the tenant protections approved under Bill 97 under Schedule 7 will be brought into force and under what timeline. That's the first one. Second motion. So this is, should the province not respond? Therefore, be it resolved that council direct the general manager of emergency and protective services to, upon response from the provincial government on their implementation timelines for Schedule 7 of Bill 97, or a period of 3 months, whichever comes first, conduct a bylaw review for the development of a renovictions bylaw with consideration to the scope and approach taken in the cities of Hamilton and Toronto, and to report back in Q2 2026. Be it further resolved that given the uncertainty around the implementation timeline from the province, as well as the lack of data available from the newly passed renovations bylaws in other municipalities, that the general manager of emergency and protective services, in collaboration with the city solicitor, provide interim updates as required on issues including but not limited to any changes to renovation bylaws from other municipalities, any known implementation changes from the provincial government regarding Bill 97, any data made publicly available relating to renovation bylaws in Ontario, any known legal challenges brought against renovation bylaws in Ontario. Be it further resolved that staff be directed to identify additional funding sources as required for this bylaw review prior to consideration of this item at the council meeting on January 22, 2025, should this motion be successful. Be it further resolved that council approve the removal of the review of potential regulations for leaf blowers and small two-stroke engines, and the review of existing regulations for body rub parlors from the 2023 to 2026 bylaw review work plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trosper. So those are the motions that are on the table. Are there any others? I don't see anything. So with that, we'll move into public delegations. The first three, Karen Andrews with Acto, Alex McDonald will be followed by Katie Burkholder Harris. Karen Andrews, are you present?
I'm here.
Fantastic. Karen, welcome to committee. You've got 5 minutes to make a presentation to us.
Thank you very much. I'm a lawyer at the Provincial Housing Clinic. I would have preferred to come to Ottawa in person, but the timing didn't work out. As I implored the city of Hamilton, you are the city of Ottawa, and you know you have a problem. Toronto and Ottawa have most of the province's tenants. The CMHC says your average rent is almost $1,900 a month for a 2-bedroom. Rents went up 5% last year, and CMHC says you have very few affordable units. I think that you know that you need accessible and affordable housing for your city to prosper. The practice of renoviction is a blatant attack on affordable housing, the shenanigans to evade rent control, and engages flagrant breaches of the law. And I've read the staff report, and they want you to stand around and wait and see. Now, if the province is not going to take this seriously, in my submission, you can. We have pesticide bylaws thanks to city advocacy. In Toronto, steps were taken to amend the municipal code that says if you're a developer, you have to rehouse tenants during the development. And guess what? The developers didn't like it. They went to court, and the judge said, there's nothing here that runs counter to the security of tenure provisions in the provincial legislation. Toronto, you have a problem. You run with that ball. Now, we can be timid in the face of grave social problems, but sometimes you have to fight. And you should not stand around and let greed and lawlessness prevail. Stifle renovation and repair. This was an issue in your staff report. Well, the United Way has done a lot of work on this and says, well, 36% of tenants have 3 major repair problems a year. The housing stock is crumbling. Again, you know you have a problem with landlords not properly repairing. But if you have a legitimate landlord that wants to repair and you have a requirement that says, landlord, you have to rehouse the tenant while you're doing it, I can guarantee that that repair will be done. Landlord, you have to subsidize, give some kind of rent supplement to this tenant that you are rehousing. I can guarantee that that repair will be done quickly. What we're talking about is the units getting flipped for more. And your staff report suggests that the tenant is unhoused and the renovation happens. But in my experience, the renovation does not happen. The vacancy is obtained, a new tenant goes into the wreck of a unit and pays more. Now, these approaches that were taken in New Westminster are tried and true, and they were proven successful. New Westminster, British Columbia, had a housing crisis like we have, and we all know that Vancouver led the charge on this in the 80s. And New Westminster said enough. They told landlords to rehouse, and the practice of renoviction stopped. We have a template. New Westminster said the nexus between the landlord and tenant continues during the renovation. Bad faith evictions stopped. What is the cost of not doing this? Every unit of affordable housing that is lost costs about $400,000 to replace. And this is what the City of Toronto heard during the deputations. So your expenses to administer this would be peanuts compared to the loss of affordable housing and compared to the misery that it causes people. Now, the focus on tenant education, I have to say, is blaming the victim. The landlord gets the vacancy, they put somebody else in. The landlord and tenant board says, too bad, so sad, there's nothing we can do, there's a new tenancy established. Now, what's in the provincial legislation looks okay. And my students say, I teach law and poverty at Osgoode, I did that for many years, they say, well, the legislation looks okay. Right of first refusal, the landlord renovates and they're supposed to let the person back in. Well, I say to them, shockingly, what happens if the landlord doesn't follow the law? And in my 30 years of doing housing work, I have only seen one case where renoviction properly happened and the person got rehoused, the old guy last February. And I was really mad about this because now I can't say it's never happened in my experience. It did happen once. Once. It worked for a client last February. So what if the landlord doesn't abide by the law? The fines are a cost of doing business, if the fine is ever ordered, if the fine is ever collected. You have a template for action in Hamilton. You have a problem. I would urge you to reject a staff report that's not very ambitious or robust. My favorite line from Aaron Sorkin's The American President, go after these guys. Thank you very much.
Aaron, thank you very much. I see one question for you from Councillor Pont.
Oh.
And Councillor Pont, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I just want, if you'll indulge me just for a minute, Chair, I just wanted to know how many evictions do you deal with, say, on a monthly basis?
Oh dear. Well, pre the election of the Harris government, I dealt with no dirty trick evictions, none. And as soon as we got rid of vacancy decontrol,
okay,
that's all I did. And this is all I do. I don't trouble myself with arrears. If you can't afford the unit, I can't make a legal argument. I only do dirty trick evictions like landlord's own use and these renoviction things, and it's aging me before my time.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to thank you for the work you do and just get a bit more of the perspective from the legal side. So I do appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for the work you do.
Well, I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I like Ottawa. Thank you very much.
Come anytime.
Okay.
We'll move on to Alex McDonald. And then Katie and then Patrick LaPlante.
Good morning, councillors. I'm a member of the Ottawa Centre chapter of Acorn, a tenant unit that supports low and moderate income tenants. Those landlords who are law abiding give their tenants an N13 notice when they conduct a rent eviction. N13 notices are also required for a demolition of a tenant's residence or to convert it for non-residential use. Last year, Acorn released a report that in part dealt with the number of applications for N13 notices. The data was obtained through Freedom of Information requests to the Landlord and Tenant Board. In the absence of evidence to the contrary, there is no reason to suppose that the ratio of rent evictions to dem evictions changed substantially from one year to the next. What has been Ottawa's recent experience? The number of applications for N13s in 2022 tripled that of 2021. Why? Landlords are in business to make a profit. How much profit? As much as possible. Given the recent explosion in rents, landlords stand to make a substantial profit on any long-term tenants they can kick out of their homes. Currently, I pay $870 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in Mechanicsville. Last night, I checked apartments for rent on rentals.ca. The cheapest available in my neighborhood was $1,595 per month. The second cheapest was $1,820 per month. There was none cheaper than $1,595 when I expanded my search to Hittenburg. My situation is not unique. Ottawa's landlords have many long-term tenants. Tenants need additional protection. In a January 9th CBC report, if a January 9th CBC report is accurate, your staff have advised you to not proceed with a rent eviction bylaw. One of the reasons reported is that Ontario's recently passed the Helping Home Buyers Protecting Tenants Act, and that this act, I quote, deals with bad faith evictions, end quote. Councillors, this report misses the point. Landlords are responsible for keeping their properties in good repair. In all fairness, tenants should not be on the hook for any expenses when the landlord is remiss in their duties. This new act provides only limited coverage for rent evicted tenants. Tenants need to be covered for all extra expenses they incur while waiting for their right to exercise the option of first refusal. Implement this fair proposal, and in the process, you'll be sending a strong signal to landlords to think long and hard before they do a rent eviction. 4 years ago, Council declared unanimously that Ottawa has a housing and homelessness emergency. I urge you to take a step to address this emergency by implementing a rent eviction bylaw that incorporates Acorn's proposals. Thank you for your time.
Alex, thank you very much. I don't see any questions for you. We'll move on to Kate Burkholder-Harris. Good morning, Ms. Burkholder-Harris.
Is this working? Good. Good morning, everyone. As he had Alex just said, next week marks the 5-year anniversary of the city declaring a housing and homelessness emergency. Tonight, over 3,000 people will be sleeping in an emergency shelter or on the street. And last week, a man died because he was sleeping on the street. All of you know the crisis that we face. You see people with no home every day on your way to work, in doorways, at intersections, in parking lots, and people calling your offices who are about to lose housing. This crisis is real for you, and you've identified affordable housing, the real solution to homelessness, as a top council priority this term. We know that rent evictions can lead to homelessness. At minimum, a rent eviction means that tenants are forced to find other housing, almost guaranteed to be unaffordable in our current housing market. While the Residential Tenancies Act has some protections built in for tenants in the case of a rent eviction, the policy does not reflect the practical. Perhaps a person can find alternative accommodations, but the unit will likely not be affordable, and none of this covers the cost of multiple moves and displacement. Tenants get the short end of the stick in these scenarios, and the consequences can be serious. A municipal rent eviction bylaw is an opportunity to address these gaps. Ensuring that a permit is obtained in advance of issuing an N13 immediately reduces evictions based on cosmetic changes to a unit, an increasingly common practice, as we've heard. Another element of the bylaw demonstrated in BC is that the municipality informs the tenant about the renovation being done rather than the landlord. This protects tenants from landlords taking advantage of someone who may not know the obscure details of provincial legislation, which frankly is most of us. We need to start designing policies that put the onus on the system to protect people, not the person in a crisis. Landlord Tenant Board data shows rent evictions have increased by 545%, a figure I know that you're going to hear many times today. Ottawa Acorn has tracked 11 buildings currently in the process of a rent eviction. I've spoken with government workers, reporters, community partners, even staff on my own team who experienced a rent eviction. None of them reported it. So that 545% increase is likely a drop in the bucket compared to the total number of what's happening. And each time a rent eviction happens, we lose more affordable units in our city, adding more stress to our local housing system. While I appreciate the concerns highlighted by staff in the report, there are some key data points not mentioned that are really important to this conversation. The first is that we do have early data on the efficacy of a rent evictions bylaw. The new Westminster model demonstrated that in the first year of its implementation, as Karen said, rent evictions dropped from 333 to 0. That's a strong start to determining if this type of bylaw can work. Other concerns raised are whether the bylaw would conflict with provincial legislation. Fair enough. Again, BC provides some helpful context. The bylaw was challenged by a private company seeking to rent evict its tenants. The bylaw was upheld by both the BC Court of Appeal and the BC Supreme Court. While I can appreciate the wait and see approach with the province, we will also see many more people lose their housing through illegitimate rent evictions if current trends continue. The human cost is too great to waste time. This past week, as Councillor Gower spoke to, we learned about a recent Association of Ontario Municipalities report that cites that cities pay 51% of the cost for homelessness in their communities. This is not only unfair, it's impossible. The least resource level of government is left holding the bag, while upper levels of government abdicate their responsibility to invest properly in solutions for the housing and homelessness crisis. We strongly support the city's advocacy to push the federal and provincial government to step up in a serious way. But a lack of funding isn't an excuse for not taking action on the things that we can control. Doing nothing or waiting until we have every piece of information before making a decision is also abdicating responsibility. Stopping homelessness before it starts, stopping the loss of affordable housing is as critical as building new affordable housing. Stopping illegal or unnecessary rent evictions before they happen is one key tool in our prevention toolbox, and we'd be short-sighted to exclude it. This is an opportunity to show leadership in our collective commitment to end homelessness. Let's respond to this crisis with the urgency it deserves and move forward with this motion. We have more tools than we think we do when it comes to ending homelessness. Let's use them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions for you. So we're going to move on to Patrick LaPlante, who will be followed by Robin Brown, who will be followed by Eileen Gale. Good morning, Mr. LaPlante. Whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee. Mr. Chair, esteemed committee members, good morning. My name is Patrick LaPlante. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a pensioner, citizen of Ottawa who lives in Capital Ward, and a leader in Acorn's Ottawa Centre chapter. As many of you know, Acorn is a community tenant union made up of low and moderate income, mostly working class people fighting for social justice issues, particularly around housing. I have a background in labor education and organizing. First of all, I would like to thank Councillor Troster for bringing forward the proposition for municipal renovation bylaw, something which Acorn advocates for in jurisdictions across Canada. I would also like to thank city staff city staff for their feasibility assessment. While I have no doubts that staff worked diligently and in good faith to issue their recommendations, I fear that their scope was too narrow and was not permitted to consider the very real human costs of N13 and even N12, as we heard from the first speaker, evictions, to take advantage of the fact that there is no such thing as vacancy control in Ontario anymore. Doing nothing and waiting for the province to implement reforms to the Residential Tenancies Act is not an option. Every person around this table was elected to be the voice of Ottawans. You were elected to make difficult choices. Today, I believe the choice before you is in fact quite simple. Toronto and Hamilton have shown leadership and have successfully passed similar renovation bylaws in the past year without waiting for the provincial government to act. While staff tell us there is no money in the existing city budget to implement this bylaw, I would argue that the cost of doing nothing is much greater. It is my understanding, well, we heard that Councillor Troster has some propositions on how to defer certain priorities. I would agree with her wholeheartedly. During the next year, while staff continues to study implementation, there should be ample data generated by both Toronto and Hamilton. I know nobody around this table got into municipal politics to preside over people living in tents and homeless shelters, but here we are. The unscrupulous use of N13 evictions notices puts residents of Ottawa into tents and homeless shelters. Today, members of the committee have the opportunity to support Councillor Troster's motion to prevent the current stock of affordable housing in the city from shrinking. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much, Patrick. I don't see any questions for you, so we're going to move on to Robin Brown, followed by Eileen Leo, and then Eddie. Good morning, Robin. Whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes to make presentations.
Happy New Year. Well, this is my first time delegating to this committee. And I'm here because the 613-819 Black Hub has decided to shift a big chunk of its work from policing to housing. So in addition to continuing to delegate every month at the Ottawa Police Services Board meetings, I will now be showing up here. And we've already begun learning about similarities and differences between housing and policing issues. For example, one similarity is that committee member, she's not here, Councillor Curry is also a member of the police board. However, unlike when I delegate to the board, Councillor Curry has no idea what I'm going to say because I didn't have to submit my full remarks in writing to this committee to be able to address you today. As far as I know, that's probably because Councillor Curry hasn't advocated for the same kinds of restrictions on public delegations.
Sorry, Robin, I'm going to cut that off. Can you speak to the question that is before us is whether or not to pass Councillor Troster's motion on a red eviction bylaw?
I'm getting to that, but I'm linking policing and housing, but I'll get to that. So I'm here to express my concerns regarding city staff recommendation against developing a rent eviction bylaw. Such a bylaw is needed because evidence clearly shows landlords are increasingly evicting tenants under the guise of major renovations in order to take advantage of Ontario's rent control loopholes that allow landlords to double rents in between tenancies. Often these renovations are unnecessary cosmetic upgrades or can be done while the tenant remains in the unit. These renovictions are a tactic used by predatory landlords to push out long-term tenants so they can raise the rent. City staff recommendation against developing a bylaw now is concerning for a number of reasons. First, city staff have cited the potential $1 million cost or around there of developing a renovation bylaw as one reason for not moving forward. Now, while we applaud fiscal responsibility, this concern stands in stark contrast to City Council's willingness to approve a $16 million increase to the over $400 million Ottawa Police Service budget, especially since, unlike housing, policing isn't one of City Council's 4 stated priorities. By Council's own framework, housing, which includes protecting residents from housing insecurity and displacement caused by renovictions, should take precedence over policing when allocating public funds. Prioritizing expansion of the police budget while hesitating to invest in a bylaw that could directly protect vulnerable tenants would undermine the credibility of Council's stated commitment to housing as a priority. Second is the issue of the differing levels of scrutiny applied to the police budget versus the proposed renovation bylaw. City staff have, I applaud this, rigorously analyzed the potential cost of the bylaw and raised concerns about its financial implications, among others. Yet similar rigor is not consistently applied to the police budget. Each year, Council.
Robin. I ask you to address the question of whether or not we should pass Councillor Chaucer's motion.
That's, again, I'm relating the two here. So, for instance, so what was I say? So council approved significant multi-million-dollar increases to police budget funding without equivalent scrutiny. So finally, staff says bylaws addressing evictions due to renovations have recently been adopted by Hamilton, Toronto, and London, but none of these bylaws have been implemented, when in fact, Hamilton's bylaw came into force January 1st, and as it has been mentioned, the city of New Westminster, BC, implemented a renovation bylaw in 2019 that introduced the strongest tenant protections against renovations in the country, and as a previous delegate mentioned, reduced evictions from 333 to 0 in the first year it was implemented. The renovation bylaw represents a direct opportunity to address a housing crisis that is actively displacing residents. Housing is a human right that is fundamental to community safety and well-being. Preventing renovictions is a tangible step toward ensuring that all residents have stable homes. I urge you to pass the renovation bylaw. This decision to approve a significant increase, again, in police funding while hesitating to invest in a renovation bylaw sends a troubling message about the city's true priorities. Put Ottawa residents first and commit to meaningful action that reflects the values of fairness, equity, and accountability, and your own stated priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Robin. I was just wondering if you could let me know, do you in your research see that there is a direct impact on Black communities when it comes to renovation, their relationship there?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Lane. That's a great question. And the answer is we don't know. This is part of the issue. So we don't have like a lot disaggregated data. When I say disaggregated, not just on Black folk, but like identity-based data on things like renovictions, how many Black folks live in Ottawa community housing, that kind of thing. So as part of the city's larger anti-racism strategy, that kind of data thing would be a good thing to bring in.
Thank you very much, Robin. Don't see any further questions for you, so we'll move on to Eileen Leo, who will be followed by Eddie Hu, who will be followed by Sarah Laviolette.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. The Ottawa Mission is grateful to Councillor Troster both for her motion from last year concerning a proposed renovation bylaw and also for her motion today to discuss this issue in detail. As councillors know, the Mission issued a report on the unprecedented need for our services last April, including emergency shelter. We continue to be at far over 100% capacity with mats on our chapel floor and clients sleeping on hard plastic chairs in our lounge each and every night. More recent information, such as Ottawa's latest point in time count, and also the report by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, revealed the enormous burden on cities such as Ottawa and others concerning homelessness. Well, several factors fuel this surge in homelessness. As we noted last April, renovictions are a major contributor. As shown by the recent report commissioned by Councillor Troster, renovictions in Ottawa have skyrocketed. In 2024, the number was over 4 times what it was in 2018. This is not surprising given the province's decision not to apply rent controls to buildings erected after November 2018. As noted by Professor Steve Pomeroy, Ottawa is experiencing a shocking erosion of affordable housing. With every 1 unit rented at $1,000, 31 units are lost. As he said, it is not enough to focus on adding new supply. It is critical. Slow the erosion and plug the holes in the bottom of the bucket. As the mission noted in our presentation to you last April, it's extraordinarily frustrating and demoralizing for us to help vulnerable community members find housing, only to see them back in our shelter after being rent-evicted. This is often devastating to their mental health and puts them at greater risk of relapse for addictions. It's also a burden to the City of Ottawa, which provides funding to our shelter and other shelters for beds and meals. Far, far better to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place through measures such as a rent eviction bylaw than trying to find very scarce affordable housing for them after they've re-entered the shelter system. Last April, we noted that the 2019 rent eviction bylaw enacted by the City of New Westminster, where rent evictions, as was previously noted by other speakers, plummeted from 333 households in 2018 to zero, or 2016 to 2018 to zero in 2019. This bylaw was ruled constitutional by the Supreme Court of Canada in 2021, and later that year, the province integrated it into its Residential Tenancy Act to extend protections against rent evictions. Last year, as been noted by other speakers, Hamilton enacted a rent eviction bylaw based on New Westminster's bylaw. Under this bylaw, rent evictions are only allowed if the landlord has already secured all building permits to complete the work and provide an engineer's report confirming that vacancy is in fact necessary. Between 2016 and 2021, Hamilton lost 5,500 affordable rental units, while only 500 new rental units were added through federal provincial funding. In effect, Hamilton stepped up to slow the erosion of affordable housing and plug the holes in the bottom of the bucket. London and Toronto, which have also experienced a significant loss of affordable housing, will implement rent eviction bylaws in March and July of 2025, respectively. We understand that the implementation of bylaws can come with some costs, and that there is concern about what the implementation of this bylaw may cost the city. Having said that, a rent eviction bylaw would also save the city by preventing vulnerable people from becoming homeless and ending up in our shelter and others, the costs of which are partially borne by the City of Ottawa. If the city needs further information concerning the efficacy of such bylaws, municipal colleagues in New Westminster and Hamilton could hopefully provide this. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for being here, Eileen. And I just have to say that that fact that you're seeing people who managed to graduate and to leave the mission and are bouncing back after being rent evicted is something that has really stuck with me. I'm just wondering, do you have a sense of what the cost is per day or potentially per year for someone to stay in your shelter? Do you have a sense of that global cost?
Well, that really depends on whether you are including simply beds and meals, which, as I mentioned, are borne by the city. I can tell you that over 55% of our budget is actually paid for by private donations, because as the need has gone up, city funding has remained reasonably stable, but the need continues to go up. So as to a cost per person, I'm sorry, I don't know that information, but certainly costs are going up with certainly the number of people and the number of services they need, but also the severity of their comorbidities. We're seeing far more people with untreated mental health conditions, untreated addictions. And if we want to provide services, we have to pay for it. So for example, our addiction and trauma services program is paid for entirely by donations. In shelter, mental health is paid for entirely by donations. So it costs both private donors and the city to meet those increasing needs.
I appreciate that. I mean, while it makes total sense to me that it's much cheaper to keep people in their homes than to pay to have them in shelter, it would be helpful in the future. And I know I poked city staff about this morning to try to get a sense of what the global cost is, so we can kind of do a cost versus benefit analysis as part of this bylaw review. Should it go?
I can take that request back to
That would
our
be very-
finance department and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, because I think part of the problem too is the cost is sometimes borne by the province in an emergency room or in a hospital or maybe in a jail. But we do know that it is obviously a lot more affordable to keep people housed. So thank you so much, and thank you for everything that the mission does. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Eileen, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions for you, so we're going to move on to Eddie Lou, followed by Sarah Laviolette, followed by Lynn Hamel. Eddie.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Eddie Rouet, and I am a board member of Ottawa Acorn. Acorn is a grassroots tenant and community organization with a membership of low and moderate income tenants here in Ottawa. Now, over the past 10 years, Ottawa Acorn has been advocating for strong municipal anti-displacement policies while organizing in buildings to defend our homes. Acorn is aware of approximately 330 tenants facing renovation right now, and inaction puts all of their housing at risk. Now, despite provincial regulations that allow tenants to return after renovations, tenants often struggle to exercise their right of first refusal for a number of reasons, including challenges in finding short-term leases at the same rent during renovations, which often take up timelines of 6 to 12 months, which current compensation does not cover. The reality that landlord and tenant board adjudicators often approve N13s without verifying if landlords have the necessary approvals, resulting in unjustified eviction orders, the financial costs of having to move twice, as well as the fact that while landlords can be fined, this very rarely happens. The LTB has issued only 13 fines for bad faith evictions since 2020, and of those, only 4 landlords have paid. Now, I would like to speak directly to the city staff's report and their recommendation ultimately to not protect tenants. City staff claim that the province's Bill 97 already addresses bad faith evictions. Now, we know at Acorn that Bill 97 has actually not yet come into effect, and even if it did, it does not include key elements like temporary accommodations, rent gap pavements, or moving cost assistance, which a municipal bylaw could cover. The city staff also point to jurisdictional issues and say that the Hamilton and Toronto bylaws are untested. Acorn has memos from multiple legal clinics and firms, including ACTO, we heard from earlier, explaining that municipal renovation bylaws complement and do not contradict provincial regulations. And of course, in turn, Hamilton and Toronto's new bylaws, as has been mentioned, are based on New Westminster's successful 2019 policy, which reduced renovictions in that city from 333 to 0. City staff claim that renovation protections may lead to more landlords pursuing N12 evictions for personal use as a similar bad faith eviction tactic. Acorn knows that even if this is true, the response should not be for the city to do nothing. Most renovictions occur in multi-unit buildings, where landlords often find it harder to use N12 evictions, though they will sometimes certainly try. BC recently banned personal use evictions in buildings with more than 5 units. Ottawa could advocate for a similar approach from the province of Ontario and still pass a municipal renovation bylaw. City staff claim that the cost of the renovation license would stifle necessary renovations. Acorn knows that landlords can still renovate units in cities with renovation bylaws, as most repairs can be done while tenants remain in their home. If vacancies are needed, landlords must support displaced tenants and protect their right to return at the same rent. The current system encourages landlords to neglect repairs and use it as justification for largely cosmetic renovations so that they can evict tenants and raise rents. City staff claim that there's no money in the city budget or capacity in the bylaw department. Acorn knows that inaction will cost the city more in the long run. Ensuring tenants keep their affordable housing saves the city money by reducing costs resulting from homelessness, healthcare needs, and the impact of mental health and addiction issues in the community. City staff recommend that tenant education and provincial advocacy would be a better alternative. But Acorn knows that if tenant rights are weak, education alone won't reduce rent evictions. Even informed tenants still face the realities of having to find temporary housing at much higher rents, paying for moving costs, effectively having to become a private investigator to keep track of their landlord's progress on renovations, and going through a legal process that will not necessarily result in getting their unit back. A rent eviction bylaw's main value is that it imposes enough burden on landlords to prevent bad faith evictions and ensures tenants are supported to exercise their rights of first refusal, primarily through temporary accommodations or rental top-ups during renovations. And this is my last sentence. Premier Doug Ford has had 7 years to stop rent evictions and hasn't. This is why municipalities across Ontario have stepped up to the plate to protect tenants, and Acorn is urging the City of Ottawa to do the same. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Eddie. That's an excellent presentation. My usual reminder to the gallery, we neither applaud nor boo. I think, yeah, the bad calls last night at the game were a lot of booing. The rest were killing us. Anyways, but here we don't boo. We're not refs at a charge game. Sarah Laviolette, followed by Finn Hamill, followed by Nelda Giroux.
Good morning, councillors and city staff. My name is Sarah, and I'm a member of the Acorn Vanier chapter. I stand before you today not just as a concerned individual, but as a single parent navigating a deeply distressing and challenging situation. I'm the parent of a child with autism and ADHD, and as you may know, children with autism require structure, routine, and stability in order to thrive. We need predictability in their lives so they can feel safe and so they can build the skills necessary to succeed. For many years, we've been fighting for the proper supports that we desperately need. I've been advocating for the resources and accommodations to help my child succeed in school. Thankfully, after many years of struggle, we are now starting to see the benefits of a new alternative school system that understands that not all children fit into the same mold, that recognizes the individual needs of my child. However, at the same time, we are facing a crisis that threatens to undo all of the progress we've worked so hard to achieve. We are currently in the process of being evicted from our home. We received an N13, and the landlord is offering no solutions, no comparable units in his other rental properties, and no opportunity for us to return once the renovations are complete. The tactics being used by the landlord are reprehensible. He has tried to trick us into signing incorrect paperwork, made insultingly low cash for keys offers, neglected to make necessary repairs, and even resorted to bullying and intimidation. This has caused immense stress and anxiety for me. The situation has left me physically ill, unable to sleep, and constantly worried about what will happen next. I simply cannot afford to move. And more importantly, I cannot afford to lose the community that has provided support for my child, for both of us over the past few years. This community has been a lifeline, one that my child and I depend on. The people here, the school, the services, all of them are a part of the structure that helps my child succeed. Losing that stability would be devastating. I need this community for my child's sake and for my own. We simply cannot pick up and start over elsewhere, especially in a housing market that is as out of reach as it is now. I stand here today to ask you for your understanding, for your support, and for your help. We need this anti-rent eviction bylaw to help families like mine, families who are fighting to provide the best for their children while facing challenges that feel insurmountable. We need affordable housing options that take into account the needs of individuals with disabilities, and we need the protection of our rights as tenants to prevent situations like these from happening in the future.
Sarah, thank you. I don't see any questions for you, but I know he was listening closely. And my urging to committee is going to be to consider your comments when they go to vote on this in another hour. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. And Finn Hamill is my child, but they were not able to make it today. She's having a lot of anxiety. So she's home, unfortunately, but yeah, she did want to make an effort to try and come out and speak.
And I'm sorry, a hand has gone up, Councillor Trosser.
No, I just also wanted to thank you to come here, for coming here, because I'm aware that especially for single parents, especially for caregivers, it can be really tough. And the fact that you came in person and spoke to us and shared your story is really meaningful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to Nelda Giroux, followed by Debbie Staples, who will be followed by Paul Burns. And if any of you are speaking as a group, feel free to bring your colleagues up as we go through the list. Good morning, Ms. Giroux. Welcome to the Planning and Housing Committee. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors and city staff. My name is Nelda Giroux, and I'm a member of the Acorn Ottawa West chapter. I totally agree with my colleagues, what they've said, but me, I'll be talking from my heart. I didn't do anything professional or whatever. I'm retired, so I don't have to overwork my mind right now. I am speaking to you today in support of Acorn's campaign for an anti-renovation bylaw because of what I went through when I received the eviction letter. I received a tenant's notice to end a tenancy by November 30th, 2024. Well, that week was very hard emotionally, psychologically, which affected my social well-being. I cried a lot, didn't sleep too well, lost weight, and I can't lose anymore. I would like next, that would be another apartment. I thought I was going to live in my car or have another apartment, but with the prices today, I can't afford it. Even working for the federal, even having a good pension, everything is so expensive. Food, gas, car, whatever. And I have to give up my car right now because like it's way too much. I feel like I didn't want my family to know because I felt like I was a disgrace to them because of what's happening with me. After working for many years and paying taxes all through my life, and at retirement, I have to fight. My dreams are shattered. At my young age of 72, I did not think I would have to go through this. Someone told me to wake up and fight because I was going to let go. So I did talk to myself and said, you've been put in this world for a reason, to do something about this. So here I am asking you to put yourself in our shoes and try to understand. You know, I always told people it wouldn't happen to me. I would have a retirement and I would live the rest of my life peacefully. Well, no, hell is on earth. It could happen to some of you. We don't know, as we do not decide our destination. Some people can lose it mentally. Some people can be like sick. And I've known people that were millionaires and they lost it. So it can happen to any one of you. In some ways, not going through this gave me a better sense of my life as I met nice people along the way. I validated me as a person. I know you have the same values as me, and I want to stress that it can happen to anyone. This is why that I will continue to support Acorn and hoping that you understand that. We need a bylaw like Hamilton and Toronto, as other cities are starting to follow. Thank you for your time. Very much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Now, there are two questions or a couple of councillors who want to ask questions of you. Councillor Plante.
Bear with me because I've only have 1 ear.
Okay, questions for you.
Okay.
Salut, est-ce que tu m'entends?
Oui.
OK, non, je voulais juste, ça fait plusieurs fois là que je vous vois à des rallyes ou pour venir ici à l'Hôtel de Ville et je voulais simplement te remercier parce que je sais c'est pas facile, vous avez parlé que vous êtes à la retraite, que vous avez d'autres plans pour la retraite et ceci n'était pas dans ton parcours, mais c'était juste pour vous remercier pour tout le temps que vous avez accordé pour ce dossier parce que quand on entend des histoires comme la vôtre, ça fait une grande différence pour les membres autour de la table et surtout avec moi. Alors, merci beaucoup.
Bien, ça me fait plaisir. Si je peux aider la génération en arrière de moi avant que je parte de ce monde, mon travail a été fait.
Ah, je pense que vous allez être ici longtemps, là. Je pense que vous allez nulle part.
C'est comme ma mère disait, l'âge d'or, c'était une merveilleuse vie. Je pense pour moi.
Merci beaucoup.
Bienvenue.
Merci, Councillor Plante. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to give you a quick thank you, Sarah, for coming out. I think it's important to show the concerns of older adults who are on fixed incomes and rely on reasonable rent. And I think that's a big gap. As the co-liaison on older adults, I'm watching this very carefully because we have many that are going to be victims of the system if we don't fix it. And I want to thank you for taking the courage and coming out today.
It's my pleasure. I'm working for everybody and especially my grandchildren and my kids because it could happen to them. So that's the only legacy I can give them.
Thank you. I've met somebody from Cornerstone who's in a shelter right now because they were rent evicted. So and it's an older adult. So it's out there. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Our next speaker, Mr. Gerard, did you make it in time? There's Gerard. Nope. Okay, we'll move on. Debbie Staples, who will be followed by Paul Burns, who will be followed by David Beauchamp.
Good morning, City Council and Council and City staff, sorry. My name is Debbie Staples. I've been an Acorn member for about 7 months. I didn't come with anything prepared because it's just too much. I've been living at my residence for 18 years. And I'm a building side by side of 6 units each. And the buildings were sold, and in August, we received a letter stating that nothing's going to change. Everything's going to be the same. We just want your personal information, like your unit, your number, your email. Okay. So that was fine. And then about a week after that, we were served cash for keys, a buyout. Yeah. And then we're looking at that and we're all in shock. And then we received the N13. So, and that was devastating. It was, you know, I never thought that I'd live long enough to see the pandemic, let alone this. And I used to be a proud Canadian. Not so much anymore. I just hope that you're listening to each of our members and their personal stories, because it really is, it's hard. I've the experience that I went through was overwhelming. You know, you live somewhere for so long and you get, it's your bubble, you know, you feel safe and this felt like, it was really hard. And, I hope none of you never have to go through this because it's serious. You know, people are dying, homeless. It's a sad thing. And, I just hope we can get some help and that you hear us and that to think about it. Think, listen to our words, listen to our heart and open yours. I thank you.
Thank you. A question from Councilor Brock.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming down this morning and sharing your personal experience with us. Do you mind just elaborating what exactly happened? You said you got a letter that said welcome and seemed fine, and all of a sudden,
Yeah,
not-
it was just something to make us feel comfortable and then pull the rug out from us underneath with the cash for keys and then the N13.
So the second letter was a monetary offer to leave. If
Yes.
you wanted to break your lease, they would facilitate that and they gave you a cash offer to leave?
Yes.
Okay, and then for folks who didn't accept, you didn't receive the N13.
No, and I just want to mention one more thing. Being with Acorn, I don't know how I would have managed without them. I don't have a great education, but without them, I wouldn't be here. I swear that they're the greatest, and they stand for so many good things, you know. And I'll always be with them because they stand for what's right. So,
Great. Thank you for sharing that today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie, for presenting today. Our next speaker is Paul Burns. Morning, Paul.
Good morning, councillors. Thank you for hearing from us. My name is Paul Burns, and I'm an Acorn member of Ottawa West Nepean. I just wanted to start by stating that this is my second time facing a rent eviction. 10 years ago, I was dem-evicted from my home, and I sought refuge at the Aspen Towers. Now, 10 years later, I'm receiving a second rent eviction, and most of us at the Aspen Towers are unable to sleep. I received notice that on June 21st, 2024, the current landlord had sold the building, and information about our new landlord was unknown, and that we should await further instructions. None of us were overly concerned, but I had a deep feeling that something bad was going to happen. Only 5 days later, on June 26, I received an N13 notice to terminate my tenancy. In order to keep the identity of the new landlord a secret, they opened a shell banking account with the address of the building as the company name. In a notice, we were asked that we write all of our rent checks going forward to the address of the building rather than the name of a company. They were very intent on keeping their identity a secret from us. The new company refused to speak with us. They wouldn't identify themselves to the current tenant. We were given a Gmail email address as the only point of contact for our landlord. Unfortunately, all of our calls and emails were ignored. Even the rental office at 2935 Richmond Road, Unit 106, the address where I received my eviction notice from, was immediately shut down. The only way I could get a response from the new landlord was to pose as a new prospective tenant and fill out an online viewing application. And when I did this, I received a call back immediately the next day from the rental agent who still refused to tell me the name of the company, even though I was a prospective tenant. During the in-person viewing, I was brought to an alternate rental office at an unmarked location in the building. And I observed that the renovations involved quick, cheap improvements, newly colored appliances, cheap IKEA cabinets, a new paint job, cheap laminate flooring. And I observed that although these units had just been renovated, there were still leaks visible in all the bathrooms of the 3 apartments that the lady showed me. I asked the rental agent what the name of the company was, and again she repeated, "Oh, it's a numbered company." But she failed to realize that she'd given me an application with the name of the company on it, Sterling Caramar. So despite these quick and cheap renovations, the new company has doubled the rental cost, even with these cheap renovations in all 3 of the apartments. They've doubled the cost of parking, and they've added a hydro bill to an already exorbitantly high rental cost. The above actions of our new landlord, Sterling Caramar, was all outlined in the building's sales brochure, and these actions were recommended by the real estate company that sold the building to them. Rent is no longer affordable. We do not need to conduct any further studies or analysis to determine if a renoviction bylaw is warranted. The city of Hamilton has a renoviction bylaw. The city of Toronto has a renoviction bylaw. How many more homeless individuals need to freeze to death on the streets before the capital of Canada also has a renoviction bylaw? Thank you very much for hearing from me.
Paul, thank you very much. There's a question for you from Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Paul. Of course, that's in my ward. And I have been door to door in the building talking to residents who were caught off guard like yourself and like previous tenants in other buildings. It was a shocker. Happened just before Canada Day weekend. So right on Canada Day weekend, so that it was trying to make it even more invisible, but it was obviously something that came out. I want to thank the tenants for paying attention to, and a big thank you to MPP Chandra Pasma, who's done a ton of work on this where it belongs. It should be the province that is dealing with this, but because they're not, I will be supporting Councillor Troster's motions because we do need it. And Aspen Towers certainly sent that message to me, seeing it right there. It's obviously going to be a very attractive location because it's right near the transit, stage 2 transit. There's a lot of older buildings there for rental, and I think we're going to see more of this. And yes, you're right. The renovations could have been done with tenants in them. It was nothing to do with that. It was about raising rents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. We'll move on then to David Longchamp, followed by Dustin Monroe, then William Barnes. We are roughly halfway through the list, and I'll just respectfully ask members to keep their comments to questions.
Good morning, councillors.
Good morning, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I am David Longchamp. I am an Acorn member of Ottawa West End chapter. I had received an N13 from my landlord. They wanted to renovate the entire building. Over 100 tenants were plagued by this decision and now had to look for a new rental. The housing crisis makes this very hard. Just finding a room to rent, $800 a room, and I'm in a bachelor. By passing this bylaw, you are not only making landlords follow the rules, but you're also giving tenants and renters security. Security that the tenants won't be left homeless because the landlord wants to replace the cupboards and the countertop. These improvements can be done while the tenant is still living. We got brand new windows and patio doors while I was still living there. It was no problem. This peace of mind, knowing that the powerless, many are not beholden to the powerful few. It's better to have this bylaw and not need it than to need it and not have it. It will help so many stay secure and safe in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I don't see any questions for you. Appreciate that. Justin Monroe will be followed by William Barnes, followed by Sharon Katz. Good morning, Justin. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good today. So I've been through some experiences, some of my own and some through other people that I know. I successfully bought renovations and managed to stay along with a few other tenants in the buildings that we live in on Pere Blanc, just near the Sugar Bush. And what's really interesting is with the, like, I didn't know it was legal to buy property just to kick people out and either demolish or renovate so they can jack up rent for new people. As far as I'm concerned, people have that kind of money to buy property. They got money to renovate. They got money to benefit existing tenants. And it's amazing when there's press stories and then you see all the commentators post remarks, like with one of the other ones here saying, get rid of your car, go get yourself a full-time job and find another apartment. Well, get rid of the car. Well, now I know somebody else that went through, is still going through renovation stuff or demolition because they want to demolish the place. So they say anyways. And she actually had to sleep in her minivan a few nights because one of the other tactics of trying to get rid of tenants is deprive them of heat. And now what were they trying to do? Get her to move out, or were they hoping the water pipes would burst and then get a demolition permit? Oh, we have to demolish the place now, too much water damage. And she needed her minivan. And fortunately, after she got bylaw involved, it took them 2 days to get the heat back on. And the owner of her building was arguing with the bylaw about it. And then when a property standards inspector came in before they got the heat back on, well, I call it people just not wanting to do their jobs. Pull the thermometer out of the coat. Oh, it's 20 degrees here. It's 18 degrees by the window. That's impossible when the furnace isn't on in the winter. And, so he obviously doesn't want to do his job. I guess there's a few bylaw people that do that too. And when I've seen other cases of homeless people, like living in these encampments, some of them live in tents, other people have RVs or camper trailers, or they'll build a shack to live in. I mean, it is that, that's basically the alternative to not passing any bylaws. And there's always these campaigns, like, police and bylaw having to clear out encampments. Which is more expensive, that or having a bylaw that forces landlords to respect the tenants? We should by all means pass a bylaw like they did in Hamilton and they did in Westminster, BC, and a few other municipalities. And the ones like depriving people of heat in the winter or refusing repairs, I was looking up sort of that, they call it, it's under the term self-help evictions. And that's where bylaw needs to have better enforcement, not have people on their payroll that don't want to do their job. And I guess other examples too, like the person that died of exposure not far from here about a week ago. That's all stuff that could be avoided if people are housed properly. I guess that's all really I'm going to say unless people have questions.
No, I have to take up the full 5 minutes, so that's great. Thank you, Dustin. You're welcome. I don't see any questions for you. Thank you very much for your presentation today. We'll move on to William Barnes, who will be followed by Sharon Katz, who will be followed by Christelle Azzi. William Barnes will be our next speaker if he's present. Okay, we'll move on. Sharon Katz will be followed by Christelle Azzi, who will be followed by Ruth Lau McDonald. Sharon?
Good morning. My name is Sharon Katz and I'm a member of Ottawa Acorn. As you've already heard, Acorn is an association of low and moderate income people working to benefit low and moderate income people. In the recent past, Acorn has been very concerned about the deteriorating situation regarding the lack of affordable rental housing, where we are losing 31 affordable housing units for every new one that is built. One of the contributors to this situation is that some landlords find ways to force their long-term tenants out of affordable housing and are then able to massively raise the rents they are able to charge their new tenants. About a year and a half ago, Ottawa Acorn held a meeting where we were able to meet over Zoom with the city councillor from New Westminster, BC, who told us about the anti-renovation bylaw that New Westminster had adopted. Basically, the anti-renovation bylaw seeks to answer two questions. One, is the renovation necessary? And two, does it really require that the occupant vacate the unit? They seem to keep some kind of file or data record of what kinds of renovations actually required that the occupant vacate the unit. He reported that for some kinds of renovations, it was considered okay for the occupant to stay there if it was a condo, but that it was claimed that the tenant would have to leave if it was a rental. The result of the bylaw in New Westminster, as you've already heard, was that there were 333 renovations the year before the bylaw and 0 once the bylaw came into effect. In other words, the bylaw worked. I hereby offer that as relevant data for Ottawa City staff. We at Acorn were encouraged when we learned that Hamilton would be adopting an anti-renovation bylaw along the same lines. And we're further encouraged when we learned that Councillor Chaucer had been in touch with her counterparts in Hamilton to learn more about their bylaw. And of course, when this committee and council as a whole supported Councillor Chaucer's motion to have staff investigate the possibility of having an anti-renovation bylaw in Ottawa, it seemed that things were looking promising. We waited and finally the report was released. The report recommended against Ottawa adopting an anti-renovation bylaw. Acorn has submitted a response to the issues raised in the staff report that would take more than 5 minutes to read and that I hope you all have read. Eddie Rouet, who spoke earlier, has summarized many of the most important points. Personally, my concern goes deeper. After reading the report, it seems to me that it was written by people who want to stop the anti-renovation bylaw, or at least slow it down as much as humanly possible. I am therefore worried that if council decides to support the idea of an anti-renovation bylaw, the same set of people will be assigned the task of developing and implementing. As probably the most extreme example of a delaying tactic, the report suggests that before proceeding any further, we should wait until we have a minimum of 1 year of data from the programs in other Ontario cities. That translates to do nothing for the next few years. This bylaw is needed now, actually before now. Another slowdown tactic is their definition of the scope of work required to do the project. They suggest that extensive consultation is required. This would take up time and money, and we all know what the results would be. Tenants want this bylaw and representatives of landlords don't want this bylaw. They also state that a bunch of research is required, everything from household incomes and rental rates to the possible differential impact on people with disabilities. Information that certainly might be nice to have, but should not be used as an excuse to delay development and implementation of the bylaw. I would therefore suggest that if council decides to proceed with the development and implementation of an anti-renovation bylaw, the council designate a councillor or councillors, Councillor Chaucer would be an obvious choice, to monitor the progress of the group developing on something like a monthly basis. This would also include examining what the group has defined as the scope of work necessary to carry out the assignment. Document 1, which was submitted along with the staff report, includes a reference to the city's housing and homelessness plan, where it states that Ottawa City Council has declared a housing and homelessness emergency and crisis, and that the city is committed to developing a comprehensive homelessness prevention and diversion strategy with a focus on housing loss prevention. I submit that if you really mean it, then you should develop and implement any renovation bylaw. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you very much for your presentation. I will just say there is an impasse, obviously, between city staff and some councillors with respect to the need for a renovation bylaw or the advisability of that. I think everyone sitting around this table has made the assumption that if directed by council to develop an anti-renovation bylaw, that staff will be professional and will follow council's instructions. So I appreciate the cynicism, but
Can I mention
we'll be
one
on
thing?
that. I don't have a question at this point. I just wanted to make sure I was making that as a comment.
Well, I have a
The-
rebuttal to that, but okay.
We'll
They were
move on
directed
to,
to report in Q4 of 2024 and they didn't do it.
Christelle Azzi is with Community Legal Services of Ottawa, who will be followed by Ruth L. McDonald, who will be followed by John Dick.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I am here to speak on behalf of Community Legal Services of Ottawa, a nonprofit community legal clinic providing legal services to people living on a low income. In 2020, the city refreshed its senior housing and homelessness.
Yeah, we're going to come back to the delegates, see whether or not there's a way to get that a little bit louder here in the room. So in the meantime, we'll move on to Ruth L. McDonald. Ruth, are you with us? We don't have Ruth online and I don't see her, them on, in the room. So we're going to move on to John Dickey. John, I'll assume you're with us. Sorry. John, we see you online, so whenever you're John is in the online meeting, but maybe experiencing. John, how are you doing?
Yes, sorry. I'm here now and can proceed.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. The Eastern Ontario Landlord Organization, EOLO, represents the owners and managers of more than 45,000 rental units in Ottawa, including many large, medium, and small residential landlords. EOLO's members rarely seek to evict tenants to perform renovations. When they issue an N13, it is usually to repair a major health or safety problem or to demolish a building which has reached the end of its useful life, usually to erect additional rental units. EOLO supports the staff report, which recommends that the city proceed to study an N13 bylaw only when more information is available to inform the study, which could be quite soon. So as the city staff say, the N13 rules are under provincial jurisdiction, and they want to know more about what the effect of these other bylaws will be. And I should note that BC's law with respect to municipality powers is different from Ontario's, and that is not a good precedent. The province recently enacted revisions to the rules, but has not brought them into force. And let me say that EOLO is fully supportive of a request to the province to bring those revisions into force. The city staff also say a city bylaw could inhibit needed repair work, and it would obviously cost the city money, and reports the city lacks the resources, the time to do the necessary work. Although, again, Councillor Troster has suggested two other bylaws reviews to push off. So EOLO would like to add the following points. Renovations and repairs are sometimes needed to maintain and improve the housing supply and to ensure that the work and sometimes vacant possession is needed to ensure the work can proceed in a safe and efficient manner, especially in older buildings. Examples of that include situations in dealing with hazardous materials like asbestos in the plaster ceiling stipple, when fire separations are taken down to relocate walls, and frankly, noise and dust affecting residents. Even now, without an anti-renovation bylaw, individual tenants sometimes delay repairs that are needed to bring dozens of rental units back onto the rental market. Existing rules often stall necessary work to the detriment of the provision of safe and secure rental housing. Expanded rules are likely to create more delays and costs, making other unidentified tenants worse off, even as they make a few identifiable tenants better off. The proponents often conflate renovictions and demevictions, and yet we have seen recently cases where a handful of rental units need to be demolished in order to build hundreds of new rental units. And we have to make sure that any new rules don't have that effect. It is critical that the steps we take to address specific parts of the housing crisis not make the overall problem worse. Unintended consequences can easily make more people worse off than the few people who are helped. I would suggest to you that surely better ways can be found to help the people who need help. And so from that point of view, EOLO is in support of asking the province to implement the changes in Bill 97 and to increase funding for tenant education and assistance. With respect to a study and whether a study proceeds and when it proceeds, we submit that it would be premature to proceed now when better information can be obtained in 12 or 15 or 18 months. And more importantly, would be critical that the team studying the questions address the disadvantages of municipal restrictions as well as the advantages. There's an assumption that's all good, it will all be advantageous, but there may well be disadvantages and drawbacks. And also address alternate remedies, because the fundamental problem here is that there isn't enough affordable housing. That's the core problem. And we want to make sure that everything we do doesn't make that problem worse. Thank you.
Nicely on time. Thank you very much, John. I don't see any questions for you, but as always, appreciate the intervention. We're going to come back to Christelle.
Sorry, is this working any better?
That's much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And you have 5 minutes to make a presentation whenever you're ready.
Thank you again, Chair and members of the committee. I'm just going to reintroduce myself. I am here to speak on behalf of Community Legal Services of Ottawa, a nonprofit community legal clinic providing legal services to people living on a low income. In 2020, the city refreshed its 10-year housing and homelessness prevention plan, calling for the preservation of existing affordable housing stock. 5 years later, the city has yet to meet its goal. In fact, the city is losing 31 affordable units for every one built. Similarly, 4 years ago, the city declared a housing and homelessness emergency, yet there has been a 25% increase in homelessness from 2022 to 2024. As the committee previously heard from our colleagues at the Alliance to End Homelessness in a 2023 deputation, the shelter system costs over $30 million every year. The overflow hotel system costs over $16 million, and an estimated $25 million is spent policing members of our community experiencing homelessness. These numbers also do not account for the increased healthcare costs associated with a housing crisis. The enactment of an anti-renoviction bylaw is a real solution, and it offers the city a way to maintain its commitment outlined in its 10-year plan. There will be costs to enacting this bylaw, but it will cost the city much more to do nothing. The city's feasibility assessment mistakenly relies on Bill 97 to address the serious issues tenants face with regard to 1013 notices. As previously noted, the bill has been awaiting proclamation for over a year and a half, and there is no indication as to when it will come into force. Even if it does, the Residential Tenancies Act can only prevent needless renovictions once it gets before the Landlord and Tenant Board. There are no safeguards for tenants prior to this tribunal process. There is no review of the N13 notice or the landlord's documents or renovation plans until the tenants appear before the board. Tenants are pushed out of their units well before they even get to the stage. Further, the province does not hold the jurisdiction to get any reviewers, adjudicators, or independent actors involved at this notice stage. Rather, this falls within the city's jurisdiction and can be done via permits. While the feasibility assessment claims that a municipality's power to regulate in this area remains untested in Ontario, you would have heard that New Westminster's anti-renovation bylaw was challenged twice in BC and was upheld by the BC Supreme Court and the BC Court of Appeal. The Ontario's Municipal Act affords municipalities broad authority to regulate areas of local concern. It cannot be left to individual tenants to screen for unnecessary renovictions and stop the loss of affordable housing. In fact, many tenants who stay in affordable units have language, literacy, and health barriers that make it impossible for them to take on this onerous task. For example, tenants of Aspen Towers, a 16-story building located in the city's West End, were served with N13 notices. Over half of the tenants signed agreements to terminate their tenancies before an application was even filed at the Landlord and Tenant Board. While we agree that tenant education can be impactful, it is our experience that this is not enough to curb bad faith renovictions. 10 years ago, clients were able to get an appointment at our office within the week. Now, clients are facing a 4-week wait time. The Tenant Duty Council program is also facing a much higher demand for its services. In 2024, there were 33% more cases on the Ottawa docket, and 21% more clients were served than in 2023. Educating a tenant on N13 rights will not help them understand whether vacant possession is required for renovation or whether they should fight it or not. This is especially true for vulnerable tenants who often reside in affordable units. Educating a tenant on the right of first refusal will not ensure that a landlord does not re-rent the unit to higher paying tenant despite the right of first refusal being exercised. Educating a tenant on LTB fines for bad faith evictions does not make it easier for individual tenants to see that process through and hold landlords accountable. For example, one of our clients, after receiving an N13 notice, genuinely believed that their landlord needed the unit for renovation. They exercised their right of first refusal and vacated, only to find the unit underwent minimal cosmetic upgrades and was re-rented at a higher price. This is not an isolated incident, as you would have heard from other speakers today. This is a pattern we hear about repeatedly. Despite receiving legal advice, the tenant still suffered. Mechanisms that demand proof of need for vacancy could prevent these unjust evictions and the trauma and burden that tenants like this client are forced to endure. Given the compelling evidence, personal account, and expert feedback, we urge this committee to act now and support an anti-renoviction bylaw to protect tenants, preserve affordable housing, and meet the city's housing goals. Thank you very much for your time and for your consideration.
Thank you very much for the intervention. I don't see any questions for you, so thank you very much for being here today. And we'll move on to Matthew Milne, who will be followed by Tony Miller, Arturo Estrella de Silva, and then Dawson Snow, which will wrap up our delegations.
Hello, and thank you for listening to me. I'm a resident of South Ottawa and a member of the South Ottawa chapter of Acorn. I'll try and keep this fairly short and sweet because my message is quite simple. Please do pass the bylaw and please don't wait to act. I absolutely support the recommendation to make informed decisions by collecting as much data as possible. But on this serious issue, in this case, I really feel like the need to take action now is more important. I understand that the Hamilton and Toronto bylaws are too new. We don't have data. The Richmond is out in BC, so it's not exactly the same, even though the data is quite dramatic. But we can still take action now. Passing the bylaw as soon as possible just gives another data point. And to speak to my personal experience, I may not personally worry very strongly that I'm going to be renovicted, but that's mainly because I'm prepared to fight, and I know Acorn would support me if I did. But I'm quite confident that over the next 12 months, Renters like me will face rent evictions in Ottawa. If you don't pass that bylaw, they're going to be vulnerable. And what is the consequence of passing a bylaw now that isn't quite perfect and does need to be amended down the road? Versus if we don't pass the bylaw, how many people will face rent eviction in the past 12 months? The consequences are potentially quite severe. I realize it's a bit sensational to draw attention to like the homeless man who died of exposure on Elgin Street a month ago, but like that's connected to the housing crisis, even if he didn't face a direct rent eviction. That's a much more serious consequence than anything that's going to be faced by the landlords association. Like no landlords are going to end up homeless on the street if you pass this bylaw and it's not perfect, but not passing the bylaw could have very serious consequences for citizens of Ottawa. So please, like, I'm worried that you're letting perfect be the enemy of good here. Like, this bylaw might not be perfect to just adopt the Hamilton one, but it's a step in the right direction. And we need, I think, to start taking action as soon as possible. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Matthew, thank you very much. We're going to move on to Tony Miller and then Artur Estrella de Silva. Tony is not online and I don't believe he's in the room. So we're going to move on to Artur Estrella de Silva. It looks like you'll be our last speaker today with the Carleton University Students Association. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Councillor. Good morning to Councillor, staff, and all those in attendance today. My name is Artur Estrella da Silva. I am the Vice President of Student Issues at the Carleton University Students Association. I spent almost 2 years at CUSA advocating for the best possible interests of the student body on issues ranging from accessibility to transit, and of course, the topic of today, housing. That brings me to our topic, which is the approval of the development of a renovation and relocation, otherwise known as renovation bylaw. The state of affordable housing in Canada is dire. Our partners at Acorn present here today reported in February last year that for every 1 unit of affordable housing built here in Canada, whether or not by nonprofit associations or directly by municipalities, we are losing 11 affordable units on the private market. This is worse in areas of high demand, especially around colleges and university campuses. And that is where our student body feels this pressure the most. Students find themselves as some of the city's most vulnerable renters. Many are completely or otherwise not fully aware of their rights as tenants under the Residential Tenancies Act. And many others have found themselves in less than ideal living conditions, often overseen by absent landlords who make little effort to improve the living situations for their tenants. This lack of awareness comes not from ignorance, but a lack of experience in Ottawa's rental market and a lack of proper regulation and identification of landlord malpractice. Long-term tenants and short-term renters, like students, both find themselves disadvantaged at the current system of rent evictions, whereby a landlord can evict a tenant for the sole purpose of so-called major renovations that are often unnecessary or done for the understand purpose of gentrifying an existing neighborhood or building. This is done through filing either the N12s or N13 forms, and we've seen the amount of those rise disproportionately on Ontario over the past several years. This creates an opportunity where, in line with the mandate provided to you through Section 151 of the Municipal Act, to effectively regulate and provide special provisions for licensing, to impose certain restrictions on landlords and companies that seek to maliciously evict tenants under the current framework. We want to thank the hardworking staff of the City of Ottawa, the work of our community partners such as Acorn Ottawa and Horizon Ottawa, and the staff of Councillors Ariel Troster, who kindly invited us to speak here today on this proposal. Our hope is that Ottawa will join the likes of London, Hamilton, and Toronto in adopting a comprehensive renovation bylaw. And at CUSA, we truly believe municipalities must step up to the plate to protect vulnerable renters, including our students, and that Ottawa has a duty to help address the affordability shortfall of the city housing stock. Thank you so much.
And sorry, I've lost my screen. Right back at you. Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I don't see any questions for you this afternoon. Thank you very much. So colleagues, that does wrap up the speakers list. I will leave it to anyone who wishes to get on the speakers list to ask questions to staff or make comment. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much. And working with my colleague, thank you. I think we've seen many iterations this last couple of days. So I do appreciate the professionalism around the table today and the chairpersonship of our chair to ensure that we are addressing the actual issue, because that's the important part, especially how this all gets downloaded to municipalities all the time is beyond me. We see it time and again with our work with FCM, Wiley's work at AMO. We're the front door for everything, unfortunately. I had a couple of quick questions to the mover of the motion. Thank you. I think we've made modifications to make it more about continuing the study. We're not actually voting on something specific. Is that correct?
Correct. So I want to point to two things. Thanks to some really great feedback from Councillor Dudas. We put a 3-month delay in the proposal for staff to start the work to begin this study. We're giving the province 3 months to respond. Both the City of Toronto and Hamilton have made the same request. Just to explain, it's a little bit tricky with Bill 97. This is a very odd situation. It's a bill that was proclaimed into law and received royal assent that contains modifications to the Residential Tenancy Act that would be really positive for tenants. But the way it was written, it simply says to be enacted at a later date by the Lieutenant Governor, and there was no date specified. So it's just sitting there. So it is enormously frustrating. And in my conversations with staff, we talked about the fact that if staff did a review, the scope would be entirely different if that was actually enacted. So that's why I've put in that 3-month delay. And yes, this is not voting on a renovation bylaw. This is voting to allow a full bylaw review process, so that when with a request them to come back to council in Q2 2026, so we could have a final vote on this before the end of this term.
Thank you. And I think that's some clarification that we're just proceeding, something I supported initially, supported my colleague. But of course, there's a couple of costs that come with this. So I just want to make sure, first of all, look at, obviously we're removing 2 items out of here. I don't know if the member of the motion wishes to confirm or not. There's 2 departments that would be affected. Obviously, we're talking about a priority about housing over other things, which I make sense, but now we're talking about sacrificing these small engines or the leaf blowers and an environmental aspect. So is there confirmation from the chair of environment that they're satisfied for pushing this down the list? I just want to be very positive.
Yep. So I've spoken both with Councillor Menard and also Councillor King, who's the one who brought the leaf blower motion forward. They are both comfortable with these items, probably not being bumped more than a few months into the 2026 bylaw review process. So that would start at the beginning of next term. They both identified them as lower priority in comparison to policies relating to housing policies.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people could most likely agree with that. I think it's going to be about, again, staff maybe will comment on that later, but the other one was related to the massage parlors. I think that would have, I assume that falls into the health bailiwick. I think there's some ramifications. I just want to know, to the mover of the motion, have we discussed this with Ottawa Public Health as well? Sorry, quick on the spot, but I'm just afraid if we're moving things out of there, it could create more of an issue. And I just want to make sure we're all.
I can refer to Councillor Kitts. We did have a conversation, although I will say, as the representative of the board that probably has the highest number of body rub parlors, I have not heard any concern from the community about the current bylaw process to regulate them. Not that that shouldn't come under review in the future, but it is not an issue I am hearing about, but I can refer to Councillor Kitts as chair.
Yeah, I have not discussed this with Ottawa Public Health specifically, but I can commit to doing so.
I actually think we should focus on tattoos, but anyway, that's a whole other discussion altogether. Tattoo regulation. Maybe 1 or 2, but I won't do that today. I'm being serious. So I think also the other thing is, and I'm looking at, there's been a lot of discussion about we're making kind of a unilateral decision here as a committee to proceed with this. And I don't think anyone would grudge us, but I'll ask the chair, Councillor Brockington, Typically, I've spoken to other colleagues. My initial intent was to move referral to your committee that deals a lot with these kind of items. Because I've heard from other colleagues like vehicle for hire, the noise bylaw, animal care control, backyard chickens, oddly enough, regulations for closed circuit television were all ones that fell below the line at this point. And instead of actually setting the priority at the committee, and again, having that discussion there, we could do this again and ensure that we're committing that we see housing moving above a lot of these things. Are you comfortable? And I'm kind of my decision on this will be based on your response. Are you comfortable making that unilateral decision to go ahead today, proceeding with this over the other below the line and the ones that have been removed?
Thank you, Councillor. The bylaw work plan is approved by City Council. As you know, this term of council's work plan has been approved by council. And the motion before us is looking to modify that work plan. Ultimately, City Council will make that decision. So if this is approved today, it will come to council later this month. And bylaw staff, as we heard earlier, will respect and abide by any decision City Council made. So the challenge with a 4-year work plan is priorities come up during that plan, and ultimately it will be up to council to say if the matters before us today take precedence or higher priority than some of the other matters as identified by Councillor Troster, then that's ultimately the decision that City Council will have to make.
So the chair supports. And the reason why I ask that is because typically we like to refer things back to the appropriate committees all the time for a public to be able to chime in. But obviously you see this as a pressing matter. And there's no need for that. We go direct to council without public input on the priorities. Good. So that's on the record. I feel much better about that. Thank you. We've also committed very heavily to looking for an answer in regards to if there is an election called, is there a stop the clock on this as well? And it might just require some friendly verbiage.
So
that will be, but I'll look to staff to respond to that as well, because I think I want to be very clear if there is a provincial election called, which most likely we will have. What happens to that legislation provincially, and what we're doing today, does it have an impact?
Okay, before we throw to legal stuff, I'll just tell you the inquiries that we've made, because this is an extremely strange situation. It's not something that's waiting for royal assent. My understanding is if it was waiting for royal assent, it would die in the order paper with an election. But it was approved with no implementation date, and that is a legal gray area. I know we've reached out to colleagues in the Ontario legislature. I don't know if city legal staff has any advice, but it is absolutely a weird one. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I look to the staff on that. I understand the gray area, but I just want to make sure we're not doing ourselves a disfavor by doing this. Just looking for an answer.
Chair, it is a strange situation, but it isn't one that is without precedent. There have been bills with similar language where it is not yet proclaimed that just lingered out there. In fact, those provisions never came into force. And then we have some that did come into force or were amended or whatnot. So it is a legal gray area. The remaining acts that were modified by Bill 97 have been brought into effect by royal assent. This was the only one that did have that proclamation. So that is where we are. It is not yet in effect, and we have no timeline at this point or any indication of the timeline as to when.
Fair enough. And just in my last 29 seconds here. Looking at I think overall we're all committed to trying to see things happen, but we don't want to hamper progress at the same time because we need a lot of units. So I guess I'm asking staff if we're not talking about people for non-payment. This is strictly related to what's in front of us today. People don't pay. That still all is provincial, which it should be, and they're not pulling up their socks and doing their jobs with the Land and Tribunal. But this is completely independent, correct? Just dem eviction, rent eviction. This is not about individuals not paying rents. This is specific to this. So everything else still is dealt with the landlord tribunal when it comes to those items.
That is my understanding, Chair.
Good, okay. So on that, I think this committee is very committed to seeing a lot of changes. The vacant unit tax, yeah, we get a lot of people, this is my land. But at the same time, we're seeing a lot of moves and people actually trying to make use of those properties now. And I think that's a good thing. On that, I again want to thank the chair and Councillor Troster for working so closely with the commitment from Councillor Brockington. He feels it doesn't have to go back to committee. I feel more satisfied and look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Dudas.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And I wanted to thank Councillor Troster for being so willing to work with me to address several of my questions and concerns. One of the questions that I had, which has been addressed, was, why would we advocate to the province to find out what their timelines are and when and why they had not proclaimed Section 7, and then not give them any time to respond back. So thank you very much for including that in the second motion. I did have a question for staff, at least one, if not a couple. So considering that Hamilton and Toronto's, and I know you haven't done the work yet to formulate what our bylaw would look like, and that's what we're proposing to go forward with today. But let's just say that Ottawa's bylaw looks a lot the same or is an exact replica of Hamilton and Toronto's bylaws. How would the protections for tenants differ under that type of bylaw versus what is proposed in Bill 97?
Chair, if I understood the councillor's question correctly, I think the main difference between the provincial approach and a municipal bylaw approach is that municipal council does not have the authority to actually stop an eviction. Only the landlord tenant board has the jurisdiction to order an eviction or refuse an eviction, order the landlord to take certain action, order compensation to the tenant. What we've seen in terms of the Hamilton and Toronto bylaws is that these bylaws complement those provincial powers. So they require a license, which looks a lot like a permit. If the landlord proceeds with the eviction without obtaining that municipal permit, the landlord is subject or is at risk of being charged and fined. If the in order to get that permit, the landlord has to come over to the municipality, declare that they've issued an N13, and then take the steps to obtain that permit. The permit requires proof that an N13 has been issued, requires proof that a building permit has been properly obtained, and requires proof in the Hamilton case by an engineer and in the Toronto case by an engineer or an architect that the landlord's work for the rental unit does require vacant possession. So those are the conditions that are attached to obtaining that permit. And again, if the renovations proceed without that permit, the municipal power, the municipal lever is to charge the landlord and potentially fine them. There are a few other elements to the bylaws, but that is the main difference. I hope I've answered your question.
It absolutely did. And while I was listening to the delegations, one of the common threads that I really want everyone who is there today or anyone who's watching online to leave this meeting with, I will ask you, Valerie, for your input on this, is we are looking at starting the process to potentially put in to law a bylaw at the municipal level that would, while make it required of landlords to get a permit and go through municipal regulations. My understanding from your response is at the end of the day, this would not stop or prevent rent evictions if a landlord truly wanted to proceed with that. Is that actually the case?
Yes, that's the case. Again, the municipal lever in this space would be to require the landlord to come to the municipality, so the municipality has knowledge of the N13 being issued. The landlord would be required to provide an education package to the tenant, but ultimately only the landlord tenant board can order evictions. The municipal council does not have that power.
So thank you very much for that clarity, because while I will be supporting these motions, and I do think that absolutely we should start the process at looking at what this would look like in Ottawa. I do not want any tenant to be under the wrong impression that even if the City of Ottawa were to enact a bylaw, it would protect them wholeheartedly. I'm never one to want to give false hope to individuals. And that doesn't mean that we as a council or a committee shouldn't pursue the research and the work required to actually come up with a plan to address it and to make it more difficult. Sober second thought for landlords. But I do want tenants to realize that it is also, wholeheartedly the provincial responsibility, and that they need to be educated on their rights. So I do thank you for that, Valerie, and thank you to the mover for once again being so collaborative in respect to these motions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Vice Chair?
Thanks, Chair. I had a couple of questions, but I think they've been addressed. So just some of my thoughts on this. Last year, when we looked at numbers, I think we only had the 2022 data available for the N13 evictions, and there was clearly a bump from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. But at the time, we weren't really sure what that accounted for. Maybe it was just a post-pandemic bump because of the moratoriums in place and other factors. But when we saw the data for 2023, the most recent data, that bump is still there. It's 4 times higher than 2019. And although we don't know all the factors behind that bump, staff do acknowledge in the report that it's highly probable that there are some unlawful evictions happening. We don't know the quantity of unknown, but I think the motion in front of us will direct staff to move forward with more research to better understand the scope of unlawful bad faith evictions. And if we were in a different environment, maybe it wouldn't be as big of a priority for council, but we have very low vacancy right now. We have an affordability crisis in housing, and we have this uncertainty for where the provincial government may actually be going with their proposals. So I think the motion in front of us keeps things moving at the city. I would hate to lose another year or 18 months before we even get started on this additional research and preparation. And I know there's a lot of advocates who'd like us to just copy and paste Hamilton's bylaw. That's not appropriate either, because we want something that if it is challenged in court, that we can actually defend. We want to make sure whatever rates or whatever procedure we're setting for licensing, if that's the way we go, that it's providing the right balance. We're not ending up with unintended consequences. And I think the cost to move forward with this additional research is pretty minimal in the greater scheme of things. And I'm hopeful that from our finance department, we can get some good recommendations before council next week on the best way to move forward. So I do think it's important. I do think there's an impact. And I think that with this additional research we're directing staff to do with council's approval, that we can be in a much better place, the end of this year, early next year, to move forward and keep the momentum going. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Curry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few process questions. First of all, when a work plan is amended by a committee, is that not considered reconsideration? It's just a question for the clerk's office.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we could review it more fully, but it is council's work plan that was approved. And should there be a shift in priorities based on recent information, then it would be within council's jurisdiction to determine what the priorities are. But I will confer with the city clerk.
Thank you. Just a thought. Unless there's new information or what's the other? There's another reason. Anyways,
And Mr. Chair, just as a city clerk, I am on the line. Happy to loop back with the general manager of EPS. My understanding is generally when the bylaw review work plan is approved, there is some acknowledgement of a midterm review or updating our priorities in the second half of the term, but happy to review that in more detail before council.
Okay, that'd be helpful. And just really, in all due respect to the chairs that were asked, chairs don't make the final decision on what should be done, right? I mean, and I'm glad to hear the chairs are supportive, and I think the chairs are being supportive because everyone's generally supportive of this idea. But at the end of the day, we all just received an email on, feeding wildlife, right? This is something that in Canada I deal with every single week. And people asking for a bylaw on it, right? Not for backyard bird feeders, so maybe you just got this email. Anyway, so I think, if we actually had to weigh it against some other ones at the committee that deals with bylaw, maybe that conversation could be held. However, given how this motion is structured, there is potentially time, right? Because we have this delay. So I will just say that, but I do think that we need to be careful about just sort of saying, oh, I think I'm okay with it, because committee and other bylaws need to be looked at. I just want to ask again, do we actually have no idea why this one section has not been proclaimed in force? I don't know if that's a legal question. Has anyone made a comment about why this part they're not proclaiming?
Chair, this is anecdotal from speaking to my colleagues in other municipalities, and perhaps our legal representative can add anything that she's heard, but I don't know all of the reasons or if there's more than one reason. What I understand is that the province is grappling with who the qualified professional should be to issue, to certify that vacant possession for an eviction is actually necessary. We know, and right now it's qualified professional to be determined. And I understand that may be one of the reasons that there is delay in proclamation.
That's fascinating, because one of the things I talked about with Councillor Troster was, based on our committee work of the Program and Services Review Committee, we're always looking for revenue generating ideas, right? Is a revenue generating idea where the province would pay our experts, which would be maybe our building inspectors, maybe our bylaw officers, who would our experts be, but that they would pay us to do this work, right? And that if a fine was applied, which could be a very hefty fine if people renovated, as we got examples of somebody puts in like a countertop, that's not a major renovation. The fine, if it was significant, who would get that money? So I just think, I guess one of my questions is, if we went down the road of doing a review like this, would these be the types of things that we would also be recommending, that we would play a role and be paid for it by the province?
Mr. Chair, that's something we could look at and explore. The two municipal examples we have before us keep it completely separate. So there is a requirement for an independent confirmation by an engineer, or in the case of Toronto, by an engineer or an architect, that vacant possession is necessary. So the approach taken there is to separate those pieces. But if we are directed by council to do this work, it's certainly something we can look at.
Okay, I'd absolutely like to see that, because we're always trying to stay in our own lane so that we're not adding more costs. And if it's fine, we'll get out of our lane, but get paid for it, then that'd be great. Now, next thing I was going to say was, so Councillor Tierney says, everything gets downloaded to the city, right? We see that all the time. Municipal government always ends up with, everything that other levels are not dealing with. Are we hearing from the MPPs? And I mean, I can't ask the entire audience, but do we know that, who we're hearing from today are also going to their MPPs to advocate that this legislation be put in force? Do we know that? I mean, maybe Councillor Troster knows best, but does anybody else have any intel that MPPs are actually doing anything on this front?
I mean, I'm certainly encouraging people to do so. I know that Acorn's done a lot of advocacy for the province. I'm seeing their heads nodding. And both the city of Toronto and Hamilton have written the same letter that we plan to write, saying, please enact these provisions in Bill 97. I don't think they're getting anywhere, but I do think we should give the province a chance to respond. And just to speak to your previous point, I'm completely open to staff coming back with a totally unique Ottawa solution. That is not entirely the same as what is being done in Toronto and Hamilton. I just think, again, as Councillor Tenier said, this is one of these situations where we're holding the bag and we're paying for a problem that is increasing at an alarming rate. So, you know, my intention of putting this motion forward is to say, let's do all the research possible. Let's see what kind of solution we can come up with. Let's give the province one more chance. And if not, we have to do something. But anytime I've spoken on this issue, I've said that the key problem here is a lack of provincial tenancy control, which creates an incentive for landlords to raise the rent between tenants as much as they want. But in absence of that rule getting fixed, I think we're doing a lot of workarounds, and it is really unfortunate.
Okay, I just would say everyone continue to talk to your MPPs as well, so that we once again don't have a provincial level problem handed to us. The other thing is, one of the delegations made the comment that, you know, once this was done in the West, there were all of a sudden no renovictions, right? But I mean, a question I asked immediately in my head there was, but then were there no renovations? Because that's the unintended consequence that, you know, I think John Dickey was saying, is that, you know, you have to appreciate the unintended consequences that then maybe landlords don't renovate at all. And then you have units that are in complete disrepair, and then we have another problem. So I want to ask staff, in your research, if you go down this road, would you also look at what those unintended consequences are? Because that is significant when we listen to what the landlord groups are saying, that they don't want to have other problems happen as a result.
Yes, absolutely, Chair. Our Vice Chair, we would look at that, and that is partly what we would consult on and engage with.
Okay. The only other thing I was going to ask, maybe I wasn't going to ask anything. I don't see any other notes here, but anyway, I'll let somebody else go. If I remember, I'll let you know.
Councillor Carr.
Thanks. I'm not a member of the committee. Do you want to take me now, or do you take me? Go ahead. Okay. Thanks. This is I don't know if it's because it's the beginning of the new year or this committee, but it's very collegial. Everybody thanking everyone for everything. So I'll start off by following suit and saying thank you to Councillor Troster for bringing this important issue to the table. It was very helpful to hear the, I don't want to say anecdotes, but the personal stories of folks from Acorn, because of course we know that we can't parse out that N13 data to figure out exactly how many are actually illegal renovictions, and so it was helpful to hear. And I will comment that, you know, I'm kind of a data person. I like to have facts, but I will say that when I had Dempsey Community Center being used as a shelter in my ward, and there were lower acuity women staying there, I had the opportunity to meet with several of them a bunch of times over concerns about, you know, the food they served or whatever it was. And I met a lot of the women there and talked to them about the reasons why they had lost their home. And often it is cases like this where they've been issued not necessarily an N13, but an N12 or anything else. So I know that the problem is out there. And that kind of brings up my question, and maybe this is for the mover of the motion. So I know, Councillor Troster, that we've really been focused on the renoviction piece, the N13s, and what we can do about that. And that's where the delegations are here. But when you asked for the inquiry, you also got data back on the N12s and the L5s and the N5s. Is there anything that you looked at with respect to the N12s that can be done? Because the numbers on N12s are very large. And that's what I frequently hear about in my community, is people that have rented a home for many years and now they want it back. And in a neighborhood where I live in Alta Vista, the prices have escalated over the years, higher than the rest of the escalations in Ottawa. And so, you know, you wonder how legitimate this is. Is there anything that can be done to address the situation with N12s as well?
So I actually think this issue with N12s is one of the key points in the staff report that I think is really important. Because there is a concern that if we push a policy lever on one form of eviction, we'll just see an increase on another. And I agree with you. It's very hard to disprove that that someone is bringing in a family member. I would encourage staff as part of this process to monitor this. My understanding is that Hamilton is monitoring it more closely to look at potential solutions. And as one of the Acorn delegates mentioned, apparently in BC, is it in BC? They have now changed the regulations provincially. So for large multi-residential buildings, they can't issue those kinds of evictions. I don't know the answer, but I think it's a very good question. And I think it should continue to be part of the bylaw review. I think at the end of the day, to speak to Councillor Dudas's point, if there's a real bad actor, we can legislate all we want. They're still going to
be in violation, right? But I do think that the potential for regulations on N13s, you know, we saw the evidence from New Westminster, BC. They did create a significant disincentive for the good actors out there, right? Who might say, okay, fine, I can swap out that countertop without kicking that person out. So again, I would leave that as a wait and see. I'm glad staff flagged it as a concern. I would encourage staff, should this motion pass, to continue it as part of our review. And we may have to come back with another motion to look at N12s if we see that there's an uptick. And the answer might be more provincial advocacy, right? To get those regulations changed province-wide. I don't think that, should we choose to enact some sort of renovation bylaw, that it's a panacea to every landlord-tenant problem in the city, nor should it be. But I will say that the concern about N13, you know, cracking down on N13s causing an increase in N12s, that's the piece that really stuck with me in the staff report, and I'm still thinking about. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, sorry. And I just want to ask a couple of similar type questions. So I don't know, did staff want to comment on that at all before I ask Councillor Troster another question?
Mr. Chair, I would point out that along with the protections in Bill 97 for N13s, there is also a section to add additional protections against unlawful N12s. Those protections have been passed through ALSN, but as the rest of the package have not yet been proclaimed.
Okay, that's promising. Thanks very much. And just kind of a similar question when I was looking at the scope of what your proposal is, Councillor Troster. And this is kind of a little bit beyond, I think, what in terms of protections, but we talked a lot about renovictions, but demevictions are also a big concern. And certainly that's something that we saw in Herongate, which I still believe is the city's biggest demoviction that ever occurred. And prior to the MOU being put in place, what my experience was as a community member at that time, I wasn't elected, was seeing situations where community members were losing their naturally occurring affordable housing and then being offered a package by a landlord, which is an incentive at first because you're just worried about making next month's rent usually, right? So you tend to see tenants taking those packages thinking, I just need to pay next month's rent, and then they're signing on to leases that they can't afford. Was there any thought to, I guess probably be beyond the scope of it, but you know, if you're signed up for a lease at a much higher rate when you experience a demoviction, is there any sort of program that you looked at in place to sort of bridge that, whether it be some sort of grant or allowance or something that we've done, for example, for community centers? Was that part of what you looked at all?
Yeah, so I didn't look at demolitions at all when I put this motion forward. I will say we, you know, and last, you know, at the end of the year, we all sat through the horrible testimonies of bank block tenants. If we enacted a renovation bylaw, it wouldn't have helped them because it was a demolition. We did set a precedent with a very good memorandum of understanding, so that's something to pursue right now. But again, I do believe that some of these changes to Bill 97 that are just sitting there on the order paper could have an impact as well on evictions due to demolition. If I am not mistaken, I don't know if staff.
If I may, I just want to try to keep the discussion in scope. There's multiple members of the actual committee who have questions as well. So if we could keep it to the matter of renovation, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no, I just wanted to clarify that it's only the renovation piece. You're not looking at that demoviction piece or anything to do about that. And that's okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yeah, thank you. Just off the top, I do have a motion on demevictions. I have a motion on demevictions, and I don't know if this is appropriate time to talk about it because we're not talking about it. We're dealing with the motions in front of us, but is there possible to get an update on that and how it ties in?
Thank you, Chair. I would defer to planning and building services in terms of the work that's happening on the demevictions file.
So Kavanaugh, that was presented at the last planning meeting, correct? Pardon? You introduced that in the last planning meeting before the end of the year, correct? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm hoping to, obviously it's not the top of this right now. So if we can have staff get back to us on that. Please. Yes, well, yeah, but it's there. So, we need to have that looked at as well. It's part of the situation. And we do have some precedents with the memorandum of understanding that has been put forward in one situation. Obviously, this is good to move forward, and we're looking at other cities, yay Hamilton. We appreciate the work that they've done, and it'll help us do our work. But it's important to keep that pressure on the province, and I think this is what it's doing. The fact that cities are doing it piece by piece, city by city, bringing these issues forward because we're living it, is really, really important. There was a question about MPPs. Oh boy, they're involved. In my own situation, my own ward with Aspen Towers, the MPP took the lead and created a booklet to give tenants so that they could see what their rights are based on what, talks with legal experts, and even brought legal experts and had a meeting so they could discuss with legal experts all their questions. So that is happening. Unfortunately, they're in the opposition. So they're not in the government. We have almost nothing here in the government. So that's one of the issues, but they're very, very involved. And they're seeing it in front of their eyes, people terrified and crying at the door because it's such a shock when you know that there's not much out there. And these were pretty good spots. They're right on bus routes and right near shopping and great spots to live. And sometimes, strangely, it's families. They're like 2-bedroom apartments, but it's families that are in them. So because I'm sure they prefer a townhouse or something where the kids could play outside, but that's all they have. So it just sends a message. As chair of Ottawa Community Housing, I'm very aware of the desperate situation for affordable housing, and renovictions are adding to this crisis. I think in terms of the big picture, we have to remind ourselves that nonprofit housing is a big part of the solution to keep housing affordable, since this is what happens when we leave it to the private sector. And that's a huge problem. Ottawa Community Housing has to do renovations too. And when they have to take people out, they call it rehousing, not renovictions, because the tenants are their responsibility. And that's the difference in the mentality. So we have to look at nonprofit housing as a big part of the solution overall. We have an emergency and we have to deal with it. So when I look at the people that are most vulnerable, that need affordable housing, those with, for example, women fleeing violence, people on disability pensions, these are the ones that are the most vulnerable. And that's the people that we're helping with this laws. So I can only just repeat, we said it was an emergency and we're adding to the emergency. So we have to do something that will take it back. So I would like an update on the demoviction motion on when we can work with it. I understand it's more on the planning side because it's about people asking to tear down a building and build a new building. Pardon? Okay. I just want to thank again Councillor Troster and see what we can get in terms of making a better situation for tenants.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few comments. Evicting people from their home to make minor non-invasive modifications is wrong. Evicting people from their home when there's legitimate renovations taking place, but not providing reasonable supports for that relocation or new rent or the right to return is also wrong. And making changes that impact people where they live in an environment that lacks tenant protections needs to be addressed. And when there are 444 municipalities in this province, it seems wrong that we would leave it up to 444 municipalities to try and solve this problem. This is a provincial issue that needs a provincial solution that brings all parties together, engaged, consulted, and contribute to an ultimate solution. So I do support the motions that are before us today. I think staff's work to date on this, staff work in the confines of the direction that city council gave them. They were following and adhering to that work plan. And their job, when asked about whether they can accommodate more work to that already busy work plan, is to provide us their best professional advice, whether or not they can do that. And ultimately, if we want to deviate from the work plan that we've already approved, it's up to city council to make that decision. And that's the type of discussion we're having today, because within a 4-year framework, priorities change. And so if we can forego the leaf blowing and body rubbing, which I think we can, for much more appropriate, for a much more appropriate focus on bylaws, then we have that discussion. But it's out here in public, and the public can understand why we're switching some bylaws for others. So I support that as the chair of the committee and wanted to explain my thoughts on that. And Chair, I just have a minor amendment to one of the motions from Councillor Troster. It's the amendment regarding amendments to the Residential Tenancy Act, which she has deemed friendly, and it's simply to add, be it further resolved that a copy of the motion be shared with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The mover is confirmed that's friendly. Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Curry.
I just remembered my one question. You know, at the beginning, Councillor Tierney said about potentially there'd be a provincial election and what that might do to the timing. Was there anything actually changed in the motion? I mean, some of us thought there was going to be an election announced today, right? Now people are saying because Premier Ford has different ideas, it might be within the next month or so. But then if there's an election, then there's an election period. And then what happens when there's an election period? Nothing. Then you get a new government in or not. Then you have another situation. So I'm just wondering, I don't know what kind of response we're going to get in 3 months. So when Councillor Tierney made that comment and said friendly amendment to something or another, what was the outcome of that?
I think that's why we worked in 3 months. Because presumably once the bid drops, it's only a month. I mean, we've been sitting on this for a long time. But you know, should there be an election, we could have a conversation. I don't know what the answer is here, because again, this is a very weird thing where it doesn't die on the order paper during an election. It's still sitting there.
Yeah, I mean, just to.
Yeah, if there was a change in government, I guess it would be a different conversation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm also open to the fact that, look, like, if any of these, if Bill 97 were enacted, if those amendments were enacted, it would change the scope of the work of the study, because there would be a whole section that would be under protection. So staff's recommendation would be different and the scope of their study might be smaller because those protections would be announced. So I think it's a win-win if they're magically enacted, right? At any point during this process.
Yeah, 100%. It's just that if staff go down a road not knowing, then that's wasted time and energy and potentially the wrong recommendations coming out of our bylaw. Like, that's all I'm saying is that the 3 months, I wasn't sure if there's then flexibility if there is an election, just because we know nobody's gonna be doing anything and it will be electioneering. It won't be, unless maybe we get a promise because of it. But I'm just saying, maybe, and if we don't want to deal with this right now, we can think about it before it comes to council, but that is a reality. If we truly want a response from the province on this, then we have to kind of give them an opportunity.
Yeah, let's, I would be open to discussing that for when the motion goes to council, absolutely. We could probably write something in there about what would happen in the case of an election, because that would only be like, the writ period is only a month. So, you know, we could figure it out.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Leeper. I'll keep my comments brief, but you know, I think I just wanted to sort of echo certainly what Chair of EPS was saying, that the process here, although it can feel very slow, it actually is really the way that this had to happen. You know, we approve a work plan. Staff has, you know, a best practice of reviewing bylaws every 10 years or so. For whatever reason, even if it predates us, the review of those bylaws is on a timeline that was important at that time. And if new priorities come up, then it is, you know, the democratic process to have councillors represent new interests and to make that recommendation and have it be voted on. So I'm actually quite pleased with how this worked out today. But generally speaking, you know, I wanted to just, I think that we are demonstrating over and over again as the city of Ottawa, when we put our heads together, as we have with housing, we have been advancing housing priorities with basically every tool in the toolbox, perhaps except for acquisition, which I've moved a motion that failed last year, and that's okay because we still need to force that issue into the public consciousness. But you know, we are assigning lands for housing. We are reducing taxation for nonprofit housing providers. We are simplifying our zoning bylaws to make housing be built more easily. We are now going to be looking at renoviction. I have been so impressed with the concerted effort of the city of Ottawa to demonstrate its commitment to housing despite the abdication of other levels of government on this very pressing issue. We, I think, have been able to demonstrate that we understand that if we aren't moving forward, we're in fact moving backwards. Standing still on this issue puts us farther and farther behind a success. That's the challenge here, is that the pace at which we're able to progress on these issues is vastly outpaced by private actors and their mobilization of capital. Also why an acquisition fund was really interesting to me. So that being said, I will certainly support the motion. I am interested in some of the applications to, you know, in its practicalities, but I just wanted to, you know, commend my council and committee colleagues for their focus on this issue and trying to reduce red tape on behalf of the city to get housing built and to get affordable housing preserved and built.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Hill.
Thank you very much, Council Leeper and colleagues for the discussion on an important topic. The issue that I want to raise really is one of, I think, perception within the federal government going forward on the City of Ottawa's actual and projected housing objectives and targets. I appreciate the comments we just heard about, you know, the advancement that the City of Ottawa has made on this topic, but I'm not sure that that's shared outside of our city. I'm genuinely concerned about how federal funding to the City of Ottawa is going to progress over the next several years if we do not demonstrate that we are in fact reducing all forms of red tape for housing and setting the conditions for all aspects of housing across the spectrum to grow, whether it be affordable, whether it be private sector, market rate, et cetera, housing, apartments, condos, et cetera. I do think that a renoviction policy that is more arduous than what current legislative bodies are advocating to protect both tenants and landlords will be seen as red tape that reduces our ability to conduct infill development. And that is a problem when a part of the reason we're in the situation we have with affordability and house inflation is that we are unable to build at the pace that we need to build. And I think that that is going to be something we really genuinely need to put some additional brainpower towards over the next several months, year or so, in order to stabilize the housing market so that our kids can afford to live in the city. So that is my biggest concern, Mr. Chair, is that we are not inadvertently creating a problem with our housing policies by looking to advance the renoviction bylaw. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hill. Councillor Troskin.
Thank you. I'm hoping this could be on wrap up. I first want to thank everyone who came to committee to speak. And I also really want to thank committee members for engaging with me in an honest and transparent way. It is very rare that I would bring a motion that contradicts the staff report because I have a ton of respect for staff. And I know that you can only work within the boundaries that we set for you and the funding that we provide to you. So I want to thank staff for helping to identify 2 low priority items. And I want to thank the members of this committee for understanding the fact that we do need flexibility sometimes when it comes to our work plans. And I think this is something we might want to look towards in governance review about how we do this in a more systemic fashion. But we have identified housing and homelessness as one of our #1 council priorities. The statistics
from the landlord tenant board in the last 3 years alone, an increase of nearly 500% of N13 evictions during a time where there was a 1-year moratorium on evictions during that period. So I can only imagine how much higher that number would be. And at the end of the day, if we don't solve this problem, it's going to cost the city more. Right now, we have 3,000 people experiencing homelessness, according to our point in time count. And my entire goal in trying to advance a solution to rent evictions is to turn the tap off on one source of homelessness. So I just want to clarify for a last time that voting for this motion does not mean you're voting for the bylaw. What you're voting for is for staff to continue doing the work. And staff have said in this report that they want 1 year of data out of Hamilton as a minimum. And this review would take a little bit more than a year. So we have good data already from New Westminster, BC, showing a significant drop in evictions down to 0 when their bylaw was implemented. And we will have real-time data out of Hamilton. And we will also have a response. We will have a response from the provincial government, and we will have a provincial government with a new mandate. So I was very happy to work in that waiting period to wait for a provincial response. And I also want to be clear, there is nothing in considering a potential rent eviction bylaw that would place any restrictions on building new housing. All it would do is ensure that potentially we would consider a step in the process to try to dissuade landlords from unfair evictions. And, you know, I'm really glad that people came today to tell their stories, especially the senior women who were here, because that's the #1 demographic I'm hearing from. Seniors who live on a fixed income, who met their end of the bargain and paid their rent faithfully for 10, 20, 30 years, who find themselves rent evicted and with nowhere else to go. And that's a really undignified way for someone to live their retirement in our city. So I want to thank everyone on this committee for listening and for engaging really honestly. And Councillor Curry, let's talk. I'm okay before it goes to council next week with working in some sort of additional stop the clock measure that would happen should there be an election, you know, during the writ period of 1 month or something of that nature. I've done my best to take all of your concerns into account, and I appreciate all of you listening and seriously considering this. And I really do want to thank staff for all your work and for working with me, even though I was challenging you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster, and thank you for the leadership you demonstrated on this. You've done the work on this file, talking to all members of committee, and this is what this committee and council are sometimes going to do, is disagree with the advice of our staff and determine that we have different priorities. And it's been a collegial discussion. It has been a discussion based on our assumption of the professionalism of our staff, the gratitude that we have for the fearlessness with which they provide us the advice. But here we are now at the point of making a determination as to whether we're going to go into a different direction. And I am glad to get the sense that we are going to move in that direction. Justin, you're still here, thank you, said, I didn't know it was legal to buy property just to kick people out. The financialization of property has created incentives to game systems. And I agree with Katie Burkholder Harris, who spoke to the application of leadership on our part if we choose not to go down this path, to address those perverse incentives to kicking out good tenants because their rents are too low, and to use loopholes and to use shortcomings in the regulatory system. I have no confidence that the province is going to enact these rules anytime soon. I think it was the Community Safety Act that took years to come into force after being passed. So anything that the city can do in the meantime will hopefully make it a little bit less, as Dustin said, legal to buy property just to kick people out. Thank you very much for that comment. With that, colleagues, there are two motions on the table. There is the motion from Councillor Troster with respect to something. What are we doing there? So this is, what's this one? So to write into the Premier to immediately proclaim and enforce the tenant protections. Does that motion pass?
Carried.
The second one is to direct staff to develop a rent evictions bylaw. Does that one pass? Is that carried?
Carried.
Present.
And I believe that is it. That's all the voting we got to do. Oh, is there a dissent? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the dissent.
Sorry, Chair. Yep, that was me dissenting on the second motion.
On the second motion with respect to directed staff to do that. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Okay. We'll move on. Great work. We have no in-camera items. I have a notice of motion. I'll distribute it as quickly as possible. My notice of motion reads, whereas the official plan, I'll let the gallery lead, because this is a big one. You're going to take note of this one. You know what, rather than read it out, because it's going to be a while, I'll just read out the therefore be it resolved. Sorry, if I could ask the gallery, our meeting is still ongoing. Our meeting is still ongoing. Okay, so I have a notice of motion for the next meeting. It has a whack of whereas clauses related to the comprehensive zoning bylaw proposals and the official plan direction that we eliminate prohibitions against shelter use in any zone such that shelter use is allowed in any zone. It will, what we'll be debating is therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to bring forward a proposed amendment to bylaw 2008-250 that would permit shelter use in all urban zones consistent with the proposal in the draft comprehensive zoning bylaw and official plan at the earliest opportunity. And be it further resolved, the shelter shall have the same definition as that in bylaw 2008-250 until such time as that may be amended through a future new comprehensive zoning bylaw. Be it further resolved that regardless of the modification to bylaw 2008-250 effected as a result of this motion, any shelter use at 40 Hearst Way would be required to seek a rezoning to permit shelter as a use, and that staff provide the necessary zoning language to give effect to this direction. So I'm proposing a fairly major change for what I think are all the right reasons. And obviously, Vice Chair Gower will be sitting in the chair for a debate on that item. So that's the notice of motion. Are there any other items for consideration at our next meeting? No. Are there any inquiries? None? Oh, sorry, I should bring up the meeting. I need to look at that. There we go. Inquiries, are there no inquiries? We have no other business. We're adjourned until February 5th, 2025. Thank you very much, colleagues. Good work.